Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
And I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
And Jason, what game are we talking about today?
Fantasian Neo Dimension.
We're just Fantasian.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the director's cut definitive version, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know what you'd call it.
We're talking about Final Fantasian. That's what we're talking about today.
Right.
Yeah, essentially.
Reap the Spoils is a semi-monthly spoiler cast. If you have not listened before, the title of the episode, the game that we just said we're talking about today, we're going to spoil that game. Usually we take a game, we take a movie or TV show related to video games, and we will all play through or watch it, we'll experience it, and we'll come back here to discuss it, to spoil it, to blow it wide open. So, if you have not played Fantasian, I highly suggest that you pause the episode and you go and play Fantasian. It's now
Yes,
available.
before we blow it wide open, yes.
Yeah, before we crack that bacteria core open and spill all the noxious gases that are inside it.
You're just making it worse, dude. You're just making it worse. Stop.
So go play Fantasian and then come back and listen to us spoil it. I don't want to spoil the game for you if you have not played it yet. But if you just want us to spoil this game for you, I mean, I'm not your mom. I can't decide whether or not you continue listening. So it's up to you. But I suggest that you go play it first.
Yeah.
That all being said, are we ready for a brief info block on Fantasian?
Yes.
So,
Cool.
let's do it. Developed by Mistwalker. Mistwalker being Hironobu Sakaguchi's development studio or company. Sakaguchi, as everyone hopefully knows, if you don't, Sakaguchi-san is the creator of Final Fantasy. Originally at Square Soft, eventually became Square Enix. He left Square Enix to start or to found Mistwalker and develop such games like Blue Dragon. I always mix these two up. Is Lost Odyssey is Mistwalker, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I always mix that up with Jade Empire for some reason. I know one is BioWare and the other one's Mistwalker.
Jade Empire is BioWare,
Yeah. So Lost Odyssey, The Last Story on Wii, Terra Battle, which is now defunct, and most recently Fantasian, obviously. This game was produced and written by Hironobu Sakaguchi specifically. It was directed by Takuto Nakamura. Music was composed by Nobuo Uematsu. Any Final Fantasy fan knows who Uematsu is, knows his work, and probably listens to it on repeat a lot. And the art was done by Manabu Kusunoki. Interesting release history with Fantasian. Fantasian was originally an Apple Arcade only title. You could only play it not just on iPhones or MacBooks or iPads. You needed the Apple Arcade subscription in order to play this game. You could not just buy it separately. You needed to subscribe to the subscription service. Which is interesting for a narrative focused or narrative driven JRPG, which is a thing we'll touch on a little bit later. But part 1 of this game released on Apple Arcade on April 1st, 2021, which I think was a launch title for the platform, if I remember correctly. I say part 1 because it was only half the game. The other half of the game, part 2 of Fantasian, came out later that year on August 13th. And most recently, Neo Dimension. It's out of Apple jail. It's out on all modern platforms. So Neo Dimension is a modernized port, or just in general and not Apple Arcade port that you can buy for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, Nintendo Switch, and PC, and it was made available on December 5th, 2024. So that's the info block for Fantasian. It's out of Apple jail. Jason was able to play it finally because he is not an Apple shill like me and could buy it.
Apple
Wait.
opposer.
Did you try playing it before?
Briefly, yeah. I
Okay.
got up to just N. I think I got in the midst of N and was like, this is cool. I'm gonna definitely play more of it, and then I never did. which it isn't really an indictment of Apple or mobile phone gaming. It's more so my kind of mentality toward handheld gaming in general, which is like a whole other can of worms for another time. So not really an indictment of this game or the fact that it was on Apple specifically. That's just my own things with playing video games. Anyway, are we ready to talk about Fantasian? Are we ready to
Y-
spoil Fantasian?
Yes.
Final
Let's
warning.
do it.
Final warning, if you haven't played this game, pause and go play it and then come back. And then, listen to your heart's content. All right. Um I don't where do you guys want to start? I wrote down the ending, and honestly, it's not a very exciting ending to be perfectly honest. At least not in my opinion.
Yeah,
I
I
guess
wasn't very
I guess
excited by
I
it
guess
either.
I guess let's just start like with general feelings. I kind of want to start with Delilah because I know Delilah has a lot of shit to say. How did you like the game?
All right, so let me preface this by saying I don't I've grown out of turn-based RPGs in my adult years, and I've played two back to back. Last month we did Metaphor, and I really wanted to play Marvel Rivals. So there's a bias injected into my opinion, and this life we can't change it. Like some people really liked Animal Crossing all of a sudden because of COVID or whatever. Things happen like that, and it's part of my experience. So that really colored my opinion, and I feel like this game was a massive waste of time. Metaphor, not so much. Uh,
Wow.
but this game,
Damn.
it's not that I hated everything. There are things about this game that I liked, and we'll talk about it. But I think overall, I was just ready for this game to be done to the point where when I ended it, I was like, yes! Oh my god, yes! Because I was so happy that I didn't have to play it anymore. Not because I actually like felt like I achieved something. So yeah.
Wow.
Of all the
Um,
games we played, this is probably my least favorite.
that's crazy. Damn, really?
I think so. I can't remember another game that we talked about together that I was this down on.
Man, well, I guess nowhere else to go but to turn it over to Jason. Uh,
Sorry.
go ahead. What did you think of the game, Jason?
I loved it. No, the game is definitely deserving of some criticisms, and it's kind of fortuitous that that we decided to play it when we did because recently PlayStation has had with the anniversary, the you could do the classic when you boot up the PlayStation, you can turn it to the classic original PlayStation, and so
Mm.
doing that and then going into the game and playing it felt like going back in time to playing the you know classic golden age PS1
Yeah.
JRPGs, particularly Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Final Fantasy is all over this game. It is essentially a Final Fantasy game by the creator of Final Fantasy. They even have names that you would instead of Sid, you get Garland, Regent Garland.
Well, no, because there's also a
Yeah,
Sid.
there is also a Sid too, but
Yeah.
it's just I'm thinking like Final Fantasy 9 break because there's Regent Sid in FF9.
Yeah, but like
Yeah,
Sid isn't necessarily
and you get my point.
bound
It's
to.
just
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
general, most of the items like either have the same name or you know exactly what it is. Like if you're a Final Fantasy fan or have played a Final Fantasy, you know what's going on here. Um, the game is definitely deserving of criticisms. It's also definitely deserving of praise, especially to fans of classic JRPGs. Um, and there's also very much we'll get into it throughout, but you can very clearly tell this was originally designed for mobile platforms. Very modular, very broken up in its design, and a lot of elements of this games have both major pros and major cons. It's not a perfect game by any stretch, but as a JRPG lover, especially of the classic Final Fantasies, I adored my time with this game. About 40 hours, a little over. And I didn't even I there was so much content that I missed. Um,
including the ending.
Yes. Also, I should put this at the top. I only got through 2/3 of two of the final boss. It's 3 phases. I basically hit a brick wall because I ran out of time, and there were crucial things. So I'm right now wearing my Weenie Hut Junior's hat and shirt. Mark, if you could, when you edit this, please try to Photoshop Weenie Hut Junior
I
hat
mean,
on my
I mean,
picture.
currently we're all on your picture. I could
Yeah.
certainly, I could make that work.
But yes, I technically did not finish the last phase of the final boss because of numbers and time. That being said, I do know the ending. I did watch the ending,
Yeah.
um, and I experienced the majority of the content of this game. The best way I can put it to Delilah, the way you felt about completing stuff. Every time I beat a boss in this game, it took me back to completing bosses back in the day, and especially here because there's so much more mechanic focus on the combat, and we'll talk about the combat. I believe the combat, while again, like most other things with this game, there are some critiques. There's also some great innovations.
Mhm.
The best comparison for me is playing this game and its battles and bosses felt like playing a Souls game, or a FromSoft game, I should say.
Don't you dare.
I think it absolutely is, in terms of learning the mechanics going in. And unlike you guys, I didn't play with a guide until the very final boss when I was crunched for time. Um, so learning those mechanics and then going out, re-equipping, going back in, felt and forming a strategy and then adjusting that strategy as the tactical situation required. It's just a difference in gameplay.
So
I really think for you, Delilah, a lot of it is colored by you not being into the turn-based gameplay, which is fine, by the way.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just want to preface this by saying I did everything, like all the side quests, every single thing. So, I saw it through beyond, except like the end game stuff. There's like another realm that opens up that you can only do on New Game Plus. Obviously, I
Yeah,
didn't do that, but other than that, I did 100% the game. And you're right. I mean, the turn-based, but then again, I didn't come off the sour of Metaphor or even Persona 5 I adore, so there's other um Final Fantasy 7, the original, there's
yes. This
other.
game is much more difficult than those games.
Oh yeah, it's the hardest JRPG I've ever played,
It's
period. In
and that's
memory.
it, and the difficulty reminds me a lot of because back in the day they used to be much harder, and here there are actual mechanics. Whereas back in the day, a lot of the quote unquote hard fights it was really just battles of attrition. It was
And
very rare to get mechanics like you get in this game, which is part of why I loved it so much.
I think I like maybe when we get to comment we can talk about your FromSoft comment, but I actually think From Software is easier than this game by like miles.
All right. So, if I could just share like my feelings on it and respond to a few things. And I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle of you two. I liked this game. I thought I was going to love it, and I did not love it. But I didn't hate it. There's a lot of things that I did like about it, but overall, just I have a lot of questions about some decisions made with this game. Um, what the only the thing I do kind of just want to comment on, Jason, you mentioned that you didn't use a guide. We did. When it came to boss fights and strategies and stuff, I tried to do that stuff all on my own. I mostly just followed a guide, so I didn't miss any items. I didn't miss any chests or hidden things and quests. Um,
Which
but
I did, yeah. And
yeah,
they become quite useful later on for mechanics. So
yeah. It's mostly like mostly following a guide for just collection purposes and stuff like that. Which is like that's kind of ingrained in my my design, the design of Mark, me, just from growing up with JRPGs and usually having a strategy guide, and a lot of
Mhm.
secrets are almost feel like they're designed to sell guides. uh
Yeah.
and a lot of that is just
oh,
carried
for sure.
forward throughout my life, like of just like if I'm playing this big long game with lots of like hidden or potentially like difficult to find collectibles and stuff, I'm going to follow a guide just to collect that stuff. And with this game being such a challenge, like yeah, there were bosses where I definitely followed the strategy, but I tried to do that stuff on my own because, to echo Jason's point, like yeah, I really loved a lot of the boss fights, a lot of the combat. scenarios that you're thrown in this game. The challenge of them is a breath of fresh air from a lot of turn-based RPGs, and that stuff I really appreciated. What I didn't like, and I think like why, if how I'm interpreting Delilah, your point about this game being a massive waste of time, is that I don't really feel like this game has much to say. It it the kind of the backstory prior to this game like being developed is that Sakaguchi replayed Final Fantasy VI and wanted to return to make a game or a JRPG that had an emotional story to tell. And that was kind of where he went with Fantasian, and I don't think it does that. I don't think it comes anywhere close to that, really. And that was just my biggest letdown, is if I'm sitting through the story of this game, and at times I'm being bored to tears by what it's trying to tell me in terms of narrative, I don't really feel like it comes anywhere close to the things that he's most well known for. Um, and that's really where I stand, and why I liked this game, but I didn't love it. You know, there were things that kept me from hating it, from finding it a slog to get through. And I will say the first half was definitely more of a slog than the second half for me. And we'll get into that because there's a very distinct difference between part one and part two of this game. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I guess this is a good segue to start talking about like going into story. But I'll just say to that, and this would be a criticism: the nature of the game, the modular design as a result of being a mobile game originally, combined with just how much more in general gameplay content there is, and actually, I actually would argue this isn't even a narrative-driven game.
I no,
Um,
I don't think it
Yeah.
is. I agree with you, and a lot of that just comes down to
the
the
narrative is
narrative.
almost the narrative is almost sprinkled in little pieces in between large segments of mostly gameplay, not large segments, multiple little segments put together of gameplay, because again it's very modular. It's meant to be picked up and played in short bursts, and you can tell that from the dungeon design to the encounter design, the way the dimension system works in the battles, like you can tell it's meant to be played like a mobile game. And the story really, and it also reflects in probably why you guys didn't like the story that much. And I have criticisms as well, especially as you just pointed out, Mark, with the pacing. It's a very sparse story actually, not much to it, but it's sprinkled over a lot of gameplay. Like I said, I put in 40 hours and I didn't even do everything. So
Yeah, I think my final time was around 65 with, so again, as I always have to preface, some idle time, just leaving my controller on the couch and walking away for an hour at a time.
Story of my life.
um but yeah, I guess let's dig into a little bit of the story. And
but I will say,
go ahead.
I will say one more thing before we dive into the story. There is a very clear thematic element that is woven throughout all of the different stories, the villain, all the heroes, and it's one we've seen plenty of times before in Final Fantasy. It's just I think there's not enough story and narrative drive there to really see it unless you're like me digging and analyzing for it.
Well,
But we'll get into it.
yeah, I think let's start with just like the kind of mid game, like the end of part one fake out that they do. We spend the whole first half of the game, all part one, thinking that Vam is the villain, and when we get to the machine realm and we meet with Prickle and the other friendly machines there, we kind of find out that, oh no, Vam isn't terrible. He gave us all hearts, and he's bringing order to the machine realm. And there's kind of where he's introduced to us as Vam the Malevolent, which doesn't leave him with a particularly like rosy sensibility, but we the machines have a different perception of him. And we kind of come to find out after defeating him, uh, and his motivation's a little iffy for me. Like his whole thing was that he's using human emotion to bring chaos from that emotion over to the machine realm and bring order from the machine realm over to the human realm to kind of keep this balance. But that in turn like brings the bacteria over to the human realm, and that kind of makes starts making it more and more uninhabitable. Am I understanding that correctly? Is
That
that
actually sounds better than I thought.
Yeah.
like
Yeah, so I actually very much understood what they're going for here because this is straight up Michael Moorcock. This is Elric.
okay.
The multiverse concept, they even use terms verbatim throughout, like the eternal conflict between chaos and order.
Well, Jason, I
This is all
mean,
Michael, and I've talked about Elric Saga and Michael Moorcock's massive influence over genre fiction
yeah, but
by
Jason, credit
being the first person to introduce these dichotomies.
credit where it's due though, Jason. Marvel invented the multiverse, all right? Like let's
No,
not get ahead of
no,
our I know.
Michael,
I'm joking.
yeah.
Yeah.
Marvel explicitly the first writers to use multiverse concept in comics specifically pointed out Michael Moorcock.
I'm just
Um,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I needed to get a rise
I
out
know,
of you.
I
um
know.
but yeah.
I guess all I was trying to say here is that like I understood what he was going for with this because yeah, it's been done before and lots of people have aped this.
Yeah, well,
And
also
honestly, the quote unquote motivation of the villains, um, or villain, well, they're like originally they were presented to us as gods, but they're really demigods because there is a god above them at the end of the day in this infinite multiverse. Um, but their motivation isn't even like the conflict between chaos and order. It ties into the core theme again of loss, grief, facing mortality, which something common to Final Fantasy and Sakaguchi in general. They're really motivated by the loss of their sister Yim
yeah, and
and how they both deal with it respectively.
I bring up the whole chaos and order thing because we spend the whole first half of the game thinking that is the conflict, thinking that Vam is the villain
Right.
and the issue at hand is that he's exchanging chaos and order between these two realms. And then, we come to find out, oh no, there's more than just those two. There's the chaos realm and there's the god realm, and these people are gods, quote unquote. Um Defeating Vam reveals the person that we thought was helping us as the real villain, Jas. And Jas is just looking to I guess Jas is like almost to me like a cross between Exdeath and Kefka, Final Fantasy 5 and 6 respectively, where he wants to return the multiverse to zero. He wants to just press the reset button, essentially bring everything back to nothing and begin a new world. And to your point, we find out more about this the death of she was Zinneker's original god name. I forget his name. She was his sister, right?
Tadros or Tardros or something like that.
Yeah, I
Talos.
neglected to write that down, but I should probably look that up real quick.
It doesn't really
Uh,
Taros.
matter.
Taros, I think.
yeah, Taros. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, you find out Zinneker's a reincarnated god. Taros, I believe Yim was his sister, and her death, yeah, messed a lot of them up. There was an attempted resurrection. You come across that room toward the end of the game in the Sanctum, and yeah, it's you said before that like it's been done before when talking about the multiverse stuff, Jason. I feel like that's just the mantra of this game. That's just the tagline of this game. A lot of these things have just been done before, and I don't really think it adds to many of those tropes.
And
Um,
I agree, and I feel like maybe it would have been more like I would have been fine with it if we got more character stuff. And I know we got some individual character backstory in the little like narrative pieces we got, but there was like no interactions with the character to the point
Yeah.
where when I found out that like Zinneker and Valrico were having a baby, I was like, where the fuck was that chemistry this whole time?
yeah,
She didn't
okay.
even comment
It's
on his
technically
beard after having a
yeah.
whole fucking
And
spiel about beards. At least then I would have been like, okay,
well,
I get it. She likes beards.
yeah. It's implied with dialogue like that, and other dialogue. Like they don't do a good job of setting that up. I agree with you.
No.
When it happens in the final scene, it comes out of nowhere. You
Well,
really have to dig for the subtle dialogue, and if you also have to do those side quests, the crystal ball research ones, to even get those extremely subtle hints
Yeah.
of dialogue. It's not well done, and I agree with you. And again, this is why I mentioned that this was originally like technically a mobile game. Like
Mm.
you can't do like the kind of heavily narrative driven console experience that we're used to on an iPad or a phone. You can't design games like that. It's
You
not an excuse for why I agree with you. It's the story and on that particular point is not well done. Um, but it is probably the reason why we don't get like a full in depth relationship. Also, the fact that the second half is so freeform, and you technically don't even have to save any characters. You can just keep the ones that you're given in the second half. Um, you'll notice that all those cutscenes in the second half are designed um, without any characters except the ones you go in with.
well,
Yeah.
not exactly. It's more it's the characters that are relevant to whatever quest you're doing. And in most
No,
cases
no, no.
that
I'm
like
saying like the final cutscene or the cutscene immediately after you beat the final boss. It's just Prickle and or whatever the fuck, and Valrika. Like
no.
Cheryl, Kina, none of them are. They're only in there if you save them, and only in the
Oh,
background.
well, yeah, of course they're only in there if you save them. That makes sense, but the final cutscene isn't necessarily who you have in your party. The final cutscene is just I'm pretty sure that's a static cutscene. I didn't have Valrika in my party when I killed the boss, but she's the one that caught the warp device in the cutscene.
No, that's what I'm talking about. I'm saying all of the main story beats do not involve any of the characters that are optional to save.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That final cutscene is designed with the people that you end
Yeah.
part one
So
with. I
so
now I'm
they
back. I understand.
basically could not design. Yeah. So basically, the second half of the main story, which technically all you have to do is get the ship, do the Valrika stuff, and there's like one or two other things. Like almost all of the content in the second half is optional,
I mean, yeah, but good luck.
which means that the main story can't actually. Yeah. So which means that the main story can't actually. But you understand what I'm saying? The main story can't actually involve like those characters can't play key roles.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
I don't think
no,
is necessarily an excuse, but I'm just saying that's why it is the way it is.
um, yeah, no, and yeah, that tracks and that makes sense with what you're saying. Now I understand because if you don't rescue, they can't have Cheryl or Kina or whomever be the one to catch the warp device in that final cutscene if there's a chance that you didn't save them. So they design it around the people that you do have in your party. That all makes sense now. Um, but just I just I want to go back to the kind of the confrontation with the final boss and yeah, go through the ending a little bit and you defeating Jas, escaping that god realm. And yeah, the Macteria reign is gone, or I think Macteria in total is just dissipated from the world. I don't really get why that is.
No,
Um,
I don't think it's completely gone at the end. I think it's
just the rain
still,
stops, like it raining from the sky.
yeah, it stops
The
Okay.
like
pollen, yeah.
adding.
And
Hmm.
I guess that partly in part can make sense, but Um, I'm gonna talk through
Yeah,
the
to be
ending,
fair,
assuming that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say to be fair, I don't think any of that was really you're not supposed to really understand or you don't need to really understand the mechanics of that, although again, it's not an excuse. I just don't think they really I think the simple explanation is they did not put really much thought into how the mechanics of that multiverse and wormhole and
Yeah,
yeah,
but that's
Chris going back to zero works. And that's again, that's a critique.
yeah,
They
Hmm.
didn't put
and
much thought into it because the whole point was supposed to be again the underlying thematic element of him improperly dealing with the grief of that loss.
yeah, and I
Hmm.
do want to push back a little bit on the fact that like it was designed for mobile, therefore it couldn't have its story structured better. Because like, what is
I'm not
a
saying it couldn't. I'm just saying that's probably why it is the way it is.
yeah, but I don't think that's a very good excuse because
I'm not
it's
saying it's an excuse. I'm just saying that's why
okay.
it is the way it is.
That's fine. I just like
I
there
agree
have
with y'all's critiques. Like
Yeah, at the end of the day, what is this if not just a handheld JRPG? And we've had those for decades and they've worked. Even ones like built dedicated for a handheld device have worked. They've been fine. So having this one be this segmented just because it's designed for phones, that to me that it's like you can kind of see that in just like the quest design and like how that all kind of works. But I just don't think it's a particularly good reason to outline of, well, it's just the way it is. I feel like there could have been so much more to this game to make it an effective narrative. A lot of that comes down to stuff that we'll talk about later, like presentation. Um, but and I also do wonder, like, this game was built in the Unity engine. And I wonder if there were maybe some limitations with that engine in terms of the presentation, in terms of certain other aspects of it, that made it so that it had to be designed the way it was. I don't really know. It's just a lot of it just comes
Don't
down
get me
to
wrong. I agree with your critique, with that critique that it's not an excuse. I also agree that, or I would say that a big part of why the narrative falls apart in the second half is I simply don't think they knew how to reconcile how much freedom they give you and how many options with creating that kind of narrative. That's why I think narratively the first half is much tighter, much better written. You get a lot more interaction between the characters, which
Mm.
ultimately ends up going nowhere for most of them in the second half.
Yeah,
but the
exactly.
problem the problem I have with
Because
that,
they
Jason,
didn't know how to write with all the optional stuff. I'm not saying this is a critique. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
but the problem I have with that is that they did it 2 decades ago. They did that with Final Fantasy VI. Actually, more than 2 decades ago at this point. 3 decades ago almost. Right?
Oh, no. I understand what you're saying. Yes, and I agree that they did it. But even
Or
Final Fantasy
Sakaguchi did
VI
at
has
least.
much more. Yeah, I agree with that. But even Final Fantasy VI had much more direction and drive in how you progress through that second section, the back half of the game, than this one does. This one just like drops you in the map basically and gives you one story quest. Like a lot of the story, you have to fucking explore the world map and find for yourself.
But
Even Final Fantasy VI gives you more direction than this does.
I would argue six gives you less. I don't know. I played the Pixel remaster not that long ago, and I feel like it's pretty obtuse as to where you have to go to find some of your to rediscover some of your party members. This game at least has like a story section, a quest section in your menu to track, like, oh, go here, go there to investigate this and maybe find this and stuff like that. I
It
don't
also
know.
warps you directly
Yeah.
to the area that you need to go
Yeah,
for the most part.
for those early story quests in the second half, it definitely does. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just this why I'm a little disappointed in this game because I can see the influences. They're all there, clear as crystal, but they don't
Right.
come anywhere close to the things that they're aping, and that's disappointing, especially given that it's still a Sakaguchi product. And I know he can do better because he's made better.
Eh,
Even and sorry, go ahead, Delilah.
no, I thought you were done. My bad.
I want to try to rein us back to talking story stuff, but we keep like veering off into this is why there's problems with this game.
Well, we're talking big picture story.
Yeah.
And to be clear, when I say I love this game, um, well, I did really enjoy certain. Like I said, the first half of the game is very tight, and a lot of the dialogue, and we'll get to like voice acting and stuff. Um, It's
Oof.
and I fully agree with you guys. The second half of the story, because it wasn't well designed with the open world and the optionality in mind, it falls apart and becomes a big mess. But that is not why I love this. I love this game for the gameplay.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. That's the thing that's keeping it up for me is the fact that I like the gameplay so much. Um, Sorry for giving all y'all a spoiler cast where we're just gonna sit here shitting on the story a little bit. um,
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, like it felt like this game was only designed to have their hands in the Apple arcade system to have a mobile game, a Final Fantasy mobile game, and I put quotes, air quotes, because it's, it didn't feel like much of the soul that's in those games, at least in my experience, was in this game. It just felt like they threw something together real quick. But I do feel like even though there was limitations, they did do some things that was pretty impressive considering they are limited to like mobile games. And part of that is related to narrative. Like I thought that the little artistic dioramas they had in the environments really like told a specific vibe, and also the still images that they had with the stories was pretty effective, all things considered. Like we didn't need a cutscene to get the emotion that they were trying to demonstrate in those little. So I feel like despite the limitations of being on mobile, they did do really well with certain things. I just feel like the writing and sort of closing certain loops that they were trying to open were never really like closed, and I just didn't
No,
feel
yeah,
connected to the
it's
story in
and
any kind of way.
real quick, you're absolutely right that like they wanted to Apple wanted to launch their gaming subscription service with like a legendary creator's brand new long form JRPG. The ironic part is that you can get the pixel remasters of Final Fantasy, I think 1 through 4 at the very least on Apple Arcade right now.
Mhm.
Mm.
Like you could play the FF Pixel remasters on Apple Arcade.
But
So it's
they're
like
not exclusive to that, right?
no, they're not exclusive to that. Like you can buy them, or if you have Apple Arcade, you can play them through Apple Arcade. Uh, but it's just kind of funny that you bring that up because that's the
Yeah.
reality now today. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like so last night after I beat the game, I did jump into New Game Plus because New Game Plus allows you to keep leveling. It increases your experience gains, and there you can unlock a second growth tree and all that. So, and
And you
there's
want the
tro
platinum.
yeah, and I want the platinum at some point. Yeah. So I jumped into New Game Plus, and it's like shocking restarting that game and suddenly remembering all these like kind of plot threads and insinuated, like hinted at things that really just don't get paid off or ever mentioned again. Um, like this whole aspect of Kina's upbringing with Owen and how he kind of kept her hidden away because her magic was like, ooh, potentially too dangerous, but eventually he's like, no, you got to learn about human beings and stuff. But he's still nervous about like her magic, and it's like that never comes up after she leaves. She was just a sheltered child, and her magic is mostly healing.
Technically, like if I'm playing devil's advocate, technically it does when it's revealed that she is oh, the missing royal firstborn, because it's
but
said that the magic is from the royal blood.
but I don't
And
think Owen knew that. He just
No, he
found
didn't.
her in the
no, of course
woods.
not. That's of course
Yeah.
that would be a plot hole. Just that how would he know that she has royal blood because
Right.
she's just there? But again, that's not really. I think with the storytelling, like, and I agree with you. That's a critique of the plot. I think with the storytelling, the point is mostly supposed to be about the characters, specifically Kina and Cheryl, and the absence that they felt growing up, and them, finding out that they're sisters, and
And you
how
know
that
what?
changes. And then in the second half, and to the second half, as much as we've been shitting on it, it should be said that the way that they can't have the characters' stories really connect that much. Each individual one, well, aside from Carol or Kina and Cheryl, because you save
Yeah.
them together. Um,
Or their
but
combined form, Carol.
yeah, um, but the actual stories that are told individually, modularly, are not terrible. Like
Yeah.
it's just that the
No.
whole thing doesn't come together with the main plot because it can't. Or
Yeah,
it
and
can't.
that
Yeah,
sucks.
it does suck. I know, I agree with you. Like it's a critique, but I also just want to make clear that like the individual stories of each character as you save them are not bad. In fact, some of them are quite good, and we'll talk about Kina and Cheryl.
Yeah, and you're yeah, those two are the prime example of, or the really the best example of that character storytelling, I guess done best in this game. But it still is just like the disconnect between the two halves of this game and some of the things that they hint at in the first half, and they just never get paid off in the second half. And a lot of that is due to like the lack of character interaction. Like Ez. Ez kind of has an infatuation with Princess Cheryl
Yeah.
because she rescued him and his
Right.
siblings from the guild people that were, being shitty toward him and stuff. And then eventually they're in the same party and it's never acknowledged. They never
Right.
acknowledge one
Yeah.
another.
Or the very like clearly it's like meant to be a romance-esque type option where you're given choices between Kina and Cheryl.
Yeah.
Never
Um
matters.
and it never matters. Well, there's
Hmm.
technically like extremely subtle dialogue differences in the final part on the boat, but yeah, it essentially doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Who did you guys quote unquote choose? Because you don't
Cheryl.
actually, Cheryl.
Cheryl,
Cheryl.
yeah.
Okay, so can I be honest with you? Like, this is part of like a roller coaster that I had with this game, is that I thought that Cheryl came off too strong in the beginning,
Yeah.
and I felt like Leo wasn't into her. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna pick Kina because it seems like he's into her. She's the only one he really remembers and things like that. And like this Cheryl girl just feels like because she's a princess that she could just have him because she's a pretty princess. And then I heard her story and I had picked Kina, by the way, just because of that. I was like, oh, I'm not gonna force him to be with someone that he's not really into because he's just like, who's this girl? I don't know who she is. Like, I guess I should know her. And she's like giving all these hints about how there was like some romance prior to him losing his memory. And he's not like, oh yeah, well, I kind of feel that. Like, there's nothing with them. I felt no chemistry between them. Just like she really liked him, and that was it. It was very one-sided. And so I didn't want to force like anyone to be in some unrequited relationship. So I said, all right, the only connection I see is between him and Kina. So I chose Kina. Then I heard Cheryl's story and I was like, oh my God, I would have chose Cheryl. Like she like has like the best story of any character in this game. And how she came out of it, like just being a complete badass, like being a princess while also like having this really like super strong magic and things like that. And like not feel like using her princess is just like a facade, but really she's just like a cool chick. I was just like, yeah, I would totally pick Cheryl. So I was just upset about that. And then for it to go nowhere, I was even more upset. I was like, well, damn. Now I
Right.
don't even feel like that emotion that I had even mattered.
It's
Yeah.
also super disappointing considering how strong the dialogue is, because the dialogue is I audibly laughed, which I almost never do, even with any media, except or with the exception of like actual comedies like movies. But there were some segments where the dialogue made me genuinely laugh in the first half. So
Same.
that just further adds to the disappointment of how there's little to no character interaction in the second half, because the character interactions, and not just between Cheryl and Leo, and like I'm thinking of like the scene where she knows that he doesn't remember their interaction, so she's making up how, or she's
Yeah.
fudging how the
Yeah.
story went.
Yeah.
Another great scene was when you warp into her room and her father's going through her stuff, and
What the heck was that?
he just happens to open the drawer with her
Her
undergarments.
panties.
Yeah,
Unmentionables. Yeah.
which made me laugh. Also, the dialogue, and it looked like there was going to be a kind of father son esque relationship between Ez and Vinegar that never goes anywhere because they can't
Hmm.
interact. It's just super disappointing because that first half is so strong in that department.
I
Yeah.
agree, and I thought they were gonna continue that, like going on that solo mission with Kina and Cheryl, and like the funny dialogue that they had between each other. Like I think Cheryl was demanding one of the robots to like allow her to go through this red like gate that was closed completely, and Kina was like, I don't think they care much for princesses. It's just like really
Yeah.
cute dialogue between that. That's what I wanted throughout the whole game, and it's just like felt went nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with all that. It's like really just potentially my biggest pet peeve with the narrative of this game is just so much is just abandoned practically in part 2.
Yeah.
Um and it's just again, I don't want to harp on this too much more. It's just
Yeah.
disappointing because it's been done already and so much better decades ago. I'm just a little baffled that it couldn't be accomplished with this. But yeah,
Oh,
I also
it could have been had they made saving everybody a requirement, which I think they should have.
I mean, if not
Mhm.
if not a requirement, at the very least, like, well, I don't know, because it's not like I'm opposed to the second half of the game, but actually, I like the second half of the game more because
The
because of
openness of the
how,
gameplay, yeah.
yeah, I mean, the openness of the gameplay, the bosses as a whole are like the best bosses, the ones that have those mechanics where you have to really think and strategize, are all in the second half.
Yeah.
There's a few choice selections in the first half, but for the most part, second half is where it's at when it comes to the best boss fights.
And they do introduce some of those mechanics in simplified form in the first half, and then reuse them, but complicate them and add new stuff on top, which that's very well done. Again, as I said before, the gameplay and the exploration, the world, the way everything is presented and set up is really the combat, the progression is really why I love this game. The
Yep.
story is the first part. I thought the first half was very good, not very good, good. The second part is like meh. But again, you have to like take into account, did you do it in its totality or not? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
because if you do, like, there are very good parts of the second half story, but it all depends on what you do. Do you find everything? Do you go and do every story quest that's available?
Yeah,
Because
but when I
it's pretty easy to miss like Tan, you have to actually go into that part of the map. There's no prompt for you to go there.
which is almost insane because
It's
like,
like the optional side characters in old Final Fantasy, like 7, like
yeah, but like
yeah,
but it's not like, but that would be, that would be a perfect analogy if at some point they decided they decided to force Yuffie into your party for a fight several times
right,
and then
right.
be like, okay, now you got to go find her, you know? No, she's just totally discoverable and otherwise hidden. Tan is like forced in, you're forced to fight with him and as him several times in part 1, and then part 2 he's not even like one of the easier main quests in terms of level requirement or soft requirement, you know?
Yeah.
For you to go and do and find. And that's just baffling to me because by the time I got Tan, I hardly ever used him. Like there were certain niche and important like circumstances to pull him out. Like he's
Like
another like,
Ribbit on Rex, as Delilah was complaining in our text chat, the quote unquote frog boss. He's basically trivialized that's actually how because I was doing that boss and couldn't get past the final part because I couldn't do enough non-elemental damage. So I decided to go exploring, found Tan, and realized all of his super powerful attacks are non-elemental. And then the
Mhm.
Ribbit on Rex became a trivial fight because of that.
But
Mhm.
see, like,
That mechanic gets stomped by Tan. Yeah,
but see,
Mhm.
arguably, like I feel like the fact that he is entirely non-elemental is what may cause me to use him less and less.
right.
Because at the
Because
end of
you
the
have to rely
day,
on weaknesses as you go on for a lot of fights. Yeah,
yeah, and most enemies that have a weakness, it's like, well, if Holy's gonna do 150% damage when physical is gonna do 100% and everybody has the ability to do physical damage, no, I'm not gonna use Tan. I'm gonna use Kina because she's got holy damage, or I'm gonna use Zinaker because he can punch with the holy might of whatever. Like,
Radiance.
yeah, the holy light of radiance. Yeah, like I'm not gonna use Tan, and I hardly did. Um, did you guys do like Tan's like side quest, or not side quest, but like his continuing quest to like unlock and further develop his divine relic
I did. I did
or
not.
artifact?
I tried the boss once, so I got all the story stuff from his quest. I did not beat the boss because it had a mechanic which I absolutely despise, and it's not the only fight in this game to have it.
Never-ending
Um,
wolves.
no, 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 the barriers,
Oh, the
never-ending
barriers.
Oh,
barriers.
Yeah.
okay.
In my opinion, it's artificial difficulty and a time waster.
Well, but I think with that fight, there was a gimmick to it where the point wasn't to break the barrier, the point was to focus elsewhere. Because the barrier would just keep getting renewed.
Yeah, but
Um,
you still, even if you were supposed to manage the wolves, but even if you
yeah.
still had to break the barrier to do damage to her. It wasn't like a mechanic where there came a point where there were no more barriers, which is why I just didn't bother because I had already gotten the story. There's no more story to get out of it at that point. It's just unlocking his ability by beating the boss.
Which that alone is like pretty good. So,
Yeah,
but Yeah, his story, I don't even, honestly, I don't remember much about his story. Jesus Christ. I
Well,
gotta be
it's also weird because that his story also involves introducing a whole bunch of other elements to the
characters.
world that feel
Yeah.
it
Oh,
feels
yeah,
tacked
that's
on.
a,
It's not a terrible story, and again, it weaves like all of the characters' individual stories. It weaves in the theme of dealing with loss, grief, dealing with mortality. These are things that are present in every character's story. It just feels it's a decent story about he's an assassin that didn't want to kill and ends up being washed up on the shore, and this girl him doing violence to another guy, and he feels guilty about it because she died and has her spirit animals. It just feels tacked on because it also introduces a bunch of elements like some empire that apparently is just there that we never interact with,
yeah,
that destroys all
exactly.
these nations. Yeah, it just kind of comes out of left field because it
Yeah.
wasn't properly set up in the first half.
And I guess
Which
maybe this is a, go ahead.
I was just going to say, which is why he should have been an optional character. I mean, he is technically an optional character because
Technically.
because you can't get him until the second half.
And
I
well, not even that, but he's never forced into your party. You have to go out of your way to actually get him to permanently join. Go ahead,
But
Delilah, sorry.
yeah,
I did all the side quests, period. So I did this one, and the story was fine, like the way it was told. But again, like it had nothing to do with anything. It felt like so
right. Which is what I
whatever.
was saying earlier. Like the individual character stories as you save them are not bad. They're actually
Yeah,
some of them are pretty good. It's just that they're all modular because
right.
it's designed with the intent that these cannot be intricate to the main story because it's
Yeah,
all optional.
but I loved getting all the stray kitties and puppies and getting them on the Urzra. That was the best.
Right.
Calling all catfish, calling all sea dogs, yeah.
Yeah, and like he was like trying to play it off like he didn't love animals and wasn't calling them all these cute little pet names. So like Leo had to he had to
And
wait for Leo to walk away to start being cute with them.
it's bits of personality like that really did like bring me up a little bit. Like, oh,
Right.
that's really sweet and
Very
cute. Like
small moments. Yeah.
finally some
Yeah.
character dynamics that are
And
interesting.
Yeah.
again, like Kina, because both Kina and Cheryl, part of the reason why we've all said like they're the best characters, is because they do have that very, and it is reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI and two characters there in that second half where they basically have a first half arc and then a second half arc.
Yeah.
Where at the midpoint they both Kina and Cheryl, find what they were looking for, but then this in the second half, their stories are about okay, dealing with the ramifications of having found that. In the case of Kina, it's she's got to go back to Owen and kind of like, all right, she's found her actual family, but now she's coming to terms with the fact that Owen is essentially her father. Like, even though the whole time in the first half she was looking for her family, she always had a family. Whereas with Cheryl, it's not dealing with the fact that she was that second child, but coming into the fact that no, she is the queen. She was the one who was raised there and understands the responsibility and is fit for it, and rises to meet that challenge. Um, Very similar to Celeste and Locke. I'm specifically thinking of. I don't want to get into too many specifics, but they kind of
Yeah, yeah.
first a first half arc and a second half arc, both of them.
Yeah. I like just so we can kind of close the book on Kina and Cheryl because they are really the standouts. I did really like kind of the Ludo narrative mechanic of like during Kina's kind of quest fight whatever, where you're given like the dialogue option of who's like your real family, and like you can't even select it. Just
Right.
eventually it gives
In
you
the
those
Ribbit
options.
in the
Yeah.
boss fight, the Ribbit Rex boss fight. Yeah.
Yeah, it presents you with those choices, but you can't actually select them. It fades out, and you go into the second phase of that fight. I did like that because there is no right answer to that question. I like that she kind of had to acknowledge that, and
Mhm.
um
Yeah, and we don't even know what the answer was. Yeah.
yeah,
Both, right?
unfortunately, what's that?
It's both.
Yeah, no,
His royal
absolutely.
family, Owen's her dad.
Unfortunately, it also brings me to another thing that doesn't carry forward from the first part into the second, which is that Owen, you leave N thinking that Owen is like gonna be dead like
Dying.
any day now,
Yeah.
and no, he's not. He doesn't die at any point in the game. You could go back to his house and be like, "Hey, Owen, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
doing great."
Yeah.
There was
"Oh,
so
it's
many
Kina."
times I went to check on him. I was like, "Oh my god, is Owen dead yet? Like, I hope he's not dead."
He's
Because I
even
really
alive
like
after the
Owen.
credits. I was expecting her to go to like
Yeah.
visit his grave during the credits, but no,
Mhm.
she goes to see him, and he's like, "Okay, you're going on a new adventure. Go on now."
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And then
Played
yeah,
with us.
Yeah, I think we've talked about Cheryl to death. I liked her like whole coronation ceremony. And there's another aspect of her character that I do want to talk about, but we haven't really talked much about. We haven't talked much about our main protagonist, Leo. Um, Kind of given the generic start of
Amnesia.
having amnesia, right?
Yeah, another Final Fantasy. These are all like Final Fantasy tropes. Like it's so recognizable to anybody familiar. Starting off losing your memory. Um,
What Final Fantasy game has a amnesiac main
Terra
character?
6. Terra does not
Oh,
know, and yeah,
yeah, no, you're right, you're right. Okay, so yeah,
there are
continuing
other
the inspiration from
yeah
six or
there are
yeah,
other
Final
ones.
Fantasy 6 specifically.
Yeah,
I mean, you
obviously,
could
like
argue that like there's some Final Fantasy protagonists that just like don't remember certain things about their past, but like not necessarily because they forgot them,
well,
you
yeah, I
know.
was gonna say like Kina is standard um secret ancestry, not in terms of royal, but like same thing as Aerith or Garnet. Actually, like Kina and Cheryl are basically like two halves of
Well,
Garnet's story from nine.
Er-
Like,
yeah, I mean, you'd argue
yeah.
Aerith knows her ancestry. Kina flat out doesn't.
I'm not saying she forgot. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the general trope of having a
They're
healer,
similar.
a healer slash summoner character that has an
She has
ancestry
healing winds. It's
to a
fine.
legendary race or group
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I'm
yeah, yeah.
saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But anyway, Leo, um, his whole I feel like there's much ado about nothing about his father specifically. Like and you know, in a way I kind of like that. Like you walk around all these different towns and cities and you talk to people and they all talk about Bernard and how great he is and how he came through there, you know, however long ago or whatever. And I kind of like the mystery surrounding him, but at the end of the day, what has he really done other than just gone around to a lot of these towns and done his own independent research on trying to, I guess, do what the gods have already done, resurrect a lost loved one.
well, again,
Um,
that's kind of the point. It's not really about who he is, what he's done. It's his drive to try to,
right, and
and it's supposed to be a feudal drive. That's kind of the thematic point.
I get that. It's just a little strange that he's so well known yet he hasn't really done much for the people. His focus mostly seems to be around himself. So,
Again, which is kind of the point. Yeah, he's not leaving anything behind. Yeah,
but my point is, if he's not really doing anything for the people, why are so many people talking about him? And why does he have this notoriety if he's not serving the greater good? That's kind of my point about the disconnect there with his character. In a way, I like that he's mysterious, but I think that the way he's mysterious and still conveyed to us, the audience, doesn't really make sense. You know what I'm saying?
It it made it seem like he went on a lot of side fetch quests for
adventures. Yeah,
people.
Oh, so he
yeah,
did what we did throughout the entire
Yeah,
game.
basically.
because the first person to really like talk about him a lot is Zinniker,
Mhm.
which I think is supposed to give the implication that he was traveling a lot around on the ship.
Well, and that also is an interesting connection to make too when you consider who Zinniker is
Right,
at his core. You know,
right.
they both lost a loved one that they in a way want to resurrect and in some ways tried to. Um, but I don't. That's kind of my point about Bernard is there's certain parts where his mystery makes sense and works, and I feel like way that a lot of people talk about him doesn't track with his actual story. Um,
Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
I think a lot of this story, like plot is plot was neglected more to try to tie everything in thematically.
Mm.
So again, the more important part is the futility of his search, but also leaving the crumbs for Leo to follow. And obviously between both of them, the most important part is Desena and her death and how it drives them, but
Mhm.
also what they learn from, you know, the futility of what they were trying to achieve in the first place, which was bring her back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, Leo, unlike Bernard, he ends up filling that gap that of loss with his newfound party of friends, the power of friendship.
Power of friendship.
The real power is the friends we made along the way. Yeah, of course.
Right.
I have a question for you guys because related to Bernard, there was like in West Fence, there was a residence and there was a piece done by Nobuo Uematsu for
Oh
that
Yes,
yeah.
was created by
yes.
Bernard called The Goblin's Whisper. I need lore.
There's a lot of, so like the robots. We'll talk about a story from an old bard called Nobuo Uematsu, and I
Yeah.
think
He
this is
wrote a
meant.
whole original story for
I've
that.
my interpretation was that this was all supposed to be kind of a cool, breaking the fourth wall use of the multiverse. That our
Mm.
universe is another realm in this multiverse,
Oh,
and that they interpret Nobuo Uematsu to be some kind of legendary bard or storyteller or something.
okay. So the
Well, it
Goblin's Whisper isn't like connected to anything
No,
specifically.
and
Okay.
I think at one point, I think it's either the recording or a piano piece you can play. They say it is written by Uematsu,
it's
an
a
old, yeah,
there's a short story, like one of those story time, like long form cutscenes that you can unlock from one of the robots in the machine realm
right. When you're
after you're
doing,
rescuing the
yeah,
the
yeah,
lost robots. One of them
Okay.
will tell you a story of like Blick Zero
Mm-hmm.
or
yes,
Yeah.
Blicko. I'm not sure. I don't
It's the
honestly, I
Pinocchio story.
a lot of those we'll touch on it later about a lot of a lot of the reasons the story didn't jive with me, and this is one of them. I did not like a lot of those story time cutscenes.
They were long.
see, I liked them. I thought it was a clever way to do it without having to do cutscenes again, probably for format and tech reasons.
I think I would have liked them if they had done them better. To put it as bluntly as I can. I
I yeah.
maybe part of it is I didn't really care for a lot of the performances and voice acting in this game. I
Hmm.
thought a lot of them were just a little too um I don't want to say amateur. They just didn't a lot of them didn't come off right to me, and I almost wish I had played the game without the voice acting on so I could just
See,
read everything in my mind.
I disagree there because a lot of those I mentioned earlier how I laughed out loud. A lot of that is purely because of the voice acting.
See,
I actually voice acting was much better than I thought it was going to be.
it was
Um,
better than it could have been for sure, but I didn't think it was
and
I there were some
it,
performances that I just didn't like.
it makes me rethink to debates that have been had in the Final Fantasy community in the past about remastering the originals and adding voice acting because I do think some things like comedy, in order to hit, require voice acting.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
not on. I wouldn't say that they would add to games that are already effective.
I, I
Personally,
I'm just saying they made me rethink. I'm not saying that there should be.
okay,
I'm just
that's
saying
fine.
because I've traditionally always been opposed to it for probably the same reasons as you, but it
Yeah,
made me think a little bit about it because certain elements like comedy only really hit because of the voice acting. Like take for instance like the finding the undergarments scene, like that probably wouldn't have been as funny if you couldn't have heard Regent Garland's like reaction to being caught as he's looking through his daughter's dresser.
really, I don't really agree with that because that was accomplished. That was accomplished in older, like just keep using Final Fantasy as the example because it's the obvious example to use. A lot of that comedy comes across just by the physicality of the characters. Someone like Regent Garland could have just started like visibly laughing and just like moving like his like he's laughing or something, and like it would have
I'm not
conveyed the same
saying
thing.
it wouldn't convey it. I'm saying the voice acting for specifically things like comedy is necessary to hit as hard.
I don't know.
I'm
I laughed out loud at a lot of
because
scenes
timing is an important component of that, and you don't get that when you're reading it.
for
That's
sure.
why, like for instance, like reading something like Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, which is a comedic fantasy series, very very famous. It's very different writing comedy for something like a book, like a novel like that, or something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, as opposed to how you would write comedy for the screen, because it's being performed and there's elements of like timing
But
and intonation of the voice.
But I guess I fundamentally disagree with like because I laughed out loud a lot at this game too. Like there were some dialogue, there were some cutscenes and interactions that were genuinely hilarious, and I think they could have been just as effective, if not maybe more effective, without the voice acting. I think we just have two conflicting viewpoints on how that all went, and I think either way, it would have worked fine. It's just overall, I felt a lot of the voice acting and performances were lacking, and that especially came true for those story time cutscenes where it just like felt like they went on forever, and that was like the number one contributing factor to me like zoning out and just maybe missing a story beat or two because I just couldn't fucking keep focus on this goddamn like I'm tired, he said
Yeah. I
loudly.
I didn't I didn't mind the voice acting, but for those specific parts, I read it. I skipped the voice completely just to read it myself, and it was just as effective that way.
Wow.
During the Blicko scene, narrative piece, I actually was invested in that story, but I still failed to understand how it's relevant to what's going on,
It
except for the
wasn't.
fact that,
It's not
oh,
invested.
machines have
Yeah.
emotions or like whatever.
Again, as we've said multiple times, none of this stuff can really be tied to the main story
But
because
it was so long. It's like it could have been a little thing that you read real quick, a little quick Pinocchio story. This was like longer than Cheryl's story, which was fantastic, right?
Really, the same thing could have been conveyed by talking to one of those robots and the robot just responding,
Right.
"Go play Near Automata."
Right, exactly. Yeah, by the way, what was that Near Automata robot's name? The one that goes around with Prickle? It was like Prickle and something.
Clicker.
Clicker,
Clicker, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Clicker had a really funny voice line slash dialogue thing that I don't know if it would have been less or more effective with or without voice, where she was like simping over the telescope in Bernard's lab.
Yeah,
She was
yeah.
like, "Oh, it's so big and handsome," and I was like, "Wow, actual more romance between uh, what's her name? I forgot again."
Clicker.
Clicker, and more romance between Clicker and the telescope than Zinniker and Valerica.
Not wrong. Look, I'll say this for the voice acting. I think the voice acting was decent to good. Certainly not like a Naughty Dog production, like the kind of voice acting you'll get in those much higher budget, which isn't an excuse, but
or even a modern Final Fantasy.
well, yeah, but you also have much better dialogue here than a modern Final Fantasy. But
Oh, I don't know about
No.
that, Jason. I don't know about
just the
that.
just the dialogue. I mean, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but like
More than a bit
compare
hyperbolic.
compared to stuff that isn't like if you're talking about like Rebirth or
No, I'm
remake,
not. No, those aren't
yeah.
even the examples I'm thinking of.
Oh, if you're talking about, I thought you were talking about that specifically. I would like. I'm not. If you're talking about like 14, then yeah.
14, 16, even 15 to an extent.
No, not 15. Are you kidding me?
Uh,
15 is atrocious. What are you talking about?
dialogue specifically, but I don't
Yeah,
want to.
dialogue. Yeah, we don't need to get into that.
We're
But
not going to
yeah,
get into this. We're not
yeah.
going to get into this. Anyway, well, I love how we set out to talk about Leo, and then we immediately were like, so his father,
Well, really, the
and went
crux
from
of
there.
really the crux of Leo. Leo is mostly. I don't want to say blank slate, but it's
He's
really
like
just.
not a blank slate. He's just like I don't know. He's also a weird character because he's like kind of a thief, but also not.
He
Like
also doesn't. We're learning through him, and he doesn't remember most of it for a good chunk of the game.
yeah.
And really, like the crux of his character, like Bernard, it's almost like to serve just to give us Bernard's story to paint out the theme of the game.
But
Which is why I said earlier, the game is very thematically tied together, but sometimes at the expense of a natural flowing story.
yeah, but the thing I do want to talk about with Leo, which is why I kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit, is I did really like his kind of ending, so to speak, where at the ceremony at the Vibra capital castle, whatever you want to call it, and
Mhm.
Cheryl wants to award him with a Medal of Honor or whatever, and he refuses it, and I think that was a very, very, very good character moment.
Mhm.
Because he essentially is just like I wasn't planning to save the world. I wasn't planning to do any of this. It just kind of happened. So no, I'm not going to accept this.
Mhm.
It's like he's being rewarded for something he never set out to do. It just aligned with what he was
True.
already aiming to do, and so he just he rejects that reward because he didn't feel that he intentionally earned it. And I think that's a really for all this game's faults and its narrative and whatnot, I think that was a really, really good moment
Yeah,
for
and it
his
was a
character.
nice callback to the tension between him and Princess Cheryl's butler guy,
Yeah.
where you had to
Sebastian.
do Sebastian, where you had to do that whole mission fighting
Yeah.
because
By the way,
he didn't like that you rejected her in the past.
yeah.
And I
And
also
by
love the reveal that there's like an army of Sebastians. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're triplets, and that's what I'm about to say. Is when you're on the Oozer at the end of the game, talking to everybody before before the credits roll or whatever, um, you can talk to Sebastian, and the other two run in, and then if you pay attention down on the side of the
Yes.
ship, the other two are like there, like hiding, lying in wait, and I
And
that again,
that's a great funny like laugh out loud piece of dialogue where it's like, "Do not
no,
ruin the deception,
but
run,
that
brothers."
but the funniest thing about that wasn't the dialogue or anything. It was the fact of just seeing them in the environment, just like hiding there. That was the
Yeah,
really funny part about that. In my opinion, at least.
Yeah, that was
So
yeah.
pretty cool. With Leo, did you guys notice, and I don't know if this was me reading into it too much, that his character from the first half to the second half felt different as he started to retain his memory of things a little bit more? Like at first he was very kind of blank slate, kind of
Yeah.
dry, not much going on, and then he became a little bit more sarcastic.
I think that's on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was done well. I will say I think the voice acting did help with that because his voice sounded a little bit different.
I mean,
Um, I especially liked when I think it was at the Starian with Sid where like shit's going down finally. You're about to get into the second half of the game and he's like, "Yeah, I know the world's like falling apart and you're about to do this like big thing, but like can you get me an egg so I can make an omelet?" And Leo's
yeah.
like, "Why don't you get it yourself?" I'm like, "Yes, finally a character that says something like that." Like that felt like a completely real reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, you go and get him the egg.
Yeah, yeah, then you get him the egg because you find
Yeah,
out
but
it's
at least
yeah.
yeah, but the writing's just self-aware.
At
Even if
times, it
like
definitely is. Yeah.
and to be fair, like the actual gameplay of going and getting the egg, the boss fight is fun. And that's why I say like I play a lot of this game for the game, the actual like process of fighting, leveling up. I enjoy the
I
combat
mean, I
and the
think that's the
battles.
only good reason to play it, if I'm being honest. But just to
It's not the only
backtrack,
good like again, I enjoyed the characters. I think the biggest takeaway from our conversations here about the story generally is that the characters are good. It's just the plot is pretty thin carrying them through, and we don't get enough interaction between them.
Yeah.
yeah, I can agree with that. If the story that they were involved in was better and could facilitate more character interaction, more character in the characters coming out, then yeah, yeah, that would be better. I think the I think the best example probably of a character lacking character, due to how the story is structured, Valrika is totally wasted. Like we kind of and this is another thing from part 1 into part 2 that just kind of goes nowhere, is the fate of the Chaos Realm where she's from. She's the only one left, and we kind of
Yeah.
learned that their society was like this hive mind where they were all connected, and the rest of them get wiped out. She's the only one left, and that's pretty much all there is to her, except for the out of left field romance between her and Zinniker, which again, like Jason, to your point, they do allude to. There is dialogue that you can seek out that will show that there is like a budding connection, that kind of grows and grows throughout the
But to
second
fair, a
half.
lot of it is in side quests. Yeah,
It's either in side quests or it's just like, there are NPCs in the foreground that you just got to go talk to, and then you'll maybe see that dialogue. It's not really something that you see coming. So
yeah.
to get this,
It's super subtle and could have been done so much better.
yeah,
It's basically like when she first meets you, she talks about your lack of follicular constitution. Basically, she's saying you don't have a beard, so you
yeah.
suck. And your father had a beard, and he was very handsome. So obviously, what they're trying to do is build up that because Zinniker has long hair and a long beard,
Yeah,
but
but she didn't
it's
even
too
say
subtle.
anything. She sees him and she's just like, "Okay, hey, bro." She like
You
I
want
thought she
you
was
want to
gonna
have a
mention
baby?
something about his beard.
Yeah, it's
Um,
disappointing.
Valrika, her
Yeah.
character design, dope as fuck. I love the way she was
Yeah.
designed.
Yeah.
Coolest. If
That's
there was romance options, I would have picked Valerica 100%.
did you
And
guys
10 for like dudes. But
did you guys happen to like feel that her character kind of looked like Desena? Because I thought there was gonna be some sort of connection there, just based
I
on
didn't
her
think so.
appearance. Like it was like kind of like the face and the fact that she had glasses, and like there's not a ton of characters that have glasses, but
Hmm.
Desena did and Valrika did, and I kind of thought there was gonna be some sort of connection between them. That didn't come
That would
to
have made
fruition.
sense, especially with the multiverse aspect of having her be essentially another version from another realm of Desena. Um,
And
but
maybe honestly that's what they were potentially trying to insinuate with that, and why she kind of had this connection
attraction
with
to,
Bernard.
yeah,
Yeah, like you might be onto something there. I also read somewhere that like it was insinuated that I think Desena was like the reincarnation of Yim, and I guess that's due in part to their kind of parallel there of dying and then being attempted to
yeah.
be resurrected. Um
I did. To be fair, though, like while I do think they kind of wasted the opportunity of having those character interactions with Valrika and Zenigir to actually build a romantic story, I did enjoy the reveal at the end of her individual story mission, where you find out that Vam left all those crystals, the memories of, because it wasn't always her realm wasn't always the Chaos realm. It's the Chaos realm because it was destroyed by Vam and the Chaos. It was originally like an actual bustling civilization. So that was a nice moment for her. But outside of that, I agree with you guys. She was kind of wasted.
Why did Vam save her of everyone? Did they explain that in any kind of way?
don't
Just
remember. It might have
she
been in a
said
story time cutscene and I might have fallen asleep, so
it's part of that same sequence where you find all the gems with all the memories. It's to be like the final witness to that civilization. He didn't want to completely destroy it.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't just like, "Oh, she's the hot one, so we'll keep her alive."
I
um
mean, that'd be my motivation.
I was gonna say, did they explain why Vam had inflicted the power for certain people to be fortune tellers, like Owen and the lady in Vance?
Well, the lady in Vance has the crystal ball of Zendikar.
Okay, I thought we gave her the crystal ball later,
We give
and
it
her.
back after we get it back from her.
Okay, so then
Or no,
why?
wait. We give her something else. We give her tarot cards, I think.
Yeah, she gets tarot
Yeah,
cards.
tarot
And
cards.
and
Yeah,
they were Desena's tarot cards at that.
Yeah.
yes, but they didn't explain why Bam gave fortune teller powers to Owen, did they? Like, what was the purpose of that? I didn't understand. I wanted to though.
He made like a deal. I think it's supposed to be implied it was like a deal with the devil. Like Owen made the deal.
But
And what
like,
was the exchange? Just more chaos?
I don't remember. I think it was something like that. Like I really don't remember. And honestly, I don't think it's really supposed to matter, even though it's not an excuse. I keep saying it's not supposed to
yeah, no,
matter,
it
I
mattered
don't
to
but
know and I
me.
don't care.
Yeah, no, the only reason it mattered to me is because like when you get to know Owen in the beginning and seeing like what he did for the people that came in, like there were different types of people that came in with like a sad face and they walked out pretty happy. I was like, "Oh, that's like a really nice thing. Is this happening because he's a good person or is this happening because he got these fortune teller powers?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe Vam was like that's when I started to question Vam's motivations before we found out that he wasn't that bad of a guy. I was like, oh, maybe Van was onto something. Maybe he wanted to do something to help people. So that again, a plot thread that never really satisfied me because I was
yeah.
invested in it for a very minute reason. It's not really relevant to like the big picture, but it was something that was mentioned, and I wanted more.
I think at the end of the day, that's the problem with this story is that there is no real big picture. Basically, it's supposed to be emulating the Eternal War again from the Michael Moorcock multiverse universe of his books, the Eternal War between Chaos and Order, where Chaos, the gods of Chaos and Order, are fighting over different realms, different realms of the multiverse. Some get destroyed, some don't, and the idea is that the Eternal Champions are supposed to be bringing balance. Like
Yeah.
I think the idea is that Vam is just trying to accomplish some form of balance, and Jazz obviously isn't. I don't think it's really supposed to go further than that. I think again the important part is supposed to be the story of Yim and how they both reacted to her death.
Okay. And because you guys chose Cheryl, when you rescue the two girls, who's the first person that Leo hugged for you guys? Was it Cheryl?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Damn. Okay.
I don't even remember him hugging either of them when you
Neither
saved
do
them.
I.
Yeah.
Like when you rescued them, he hugged Kina for me, and
Well, then he probably hugged Cheryl for I
For
don't know.
us, yeah.
I really don't know.
Again, the ramifications of choosing are so subtle and insignificant as to be
yeah, it
pointless,
sucks.
which was really disappointing to me.
I
Yeah.
mean yeah, it's like that's why I say ultimately I feel like this game just has nothing to say. Is like there's things that you could sit here and be like, "Oh, well,
Well, it
what
has
happens if
something to
I
say. It's just very on the nose and very simple, and it's been done before a lot in Final
Well,
Fantasy.
that's the thing is that it's been done before in Final Fantasy. It's been done before by so it brings nothing new to it has no deeper meaning. It's just like here's a game that
It
has
does.
an
It's just been done before. Is the problem? Yeah.
but I don't. What is it? What is this game ultimately trying to say, other than having just like general themes of mourning and loss? It's like
The
there's no
same thing in Final Fantasy VII. Same thing in Final Fantasy IX. Dealing with those existential, concepts.
yeah, but I those games do an infinitely better job
Oh no,
at
I'm not disagreeing with you.
in at least having something to say, at least having some sort of impact in what they're trying to convey than this game does, and that even comes down to like stupid little choices like that, you know?
Again, again, as I said before, I think the main focus here was supposed to be giving you characters that you enjoy and individual stories. I think they understood that because of how open form the end half is, and they were unable to put it together. They tried to focus as much on making the individual stories and the character aspects the most interesting part, which I agree they succeeded at. It's just the overarching plot doesn't tie them together and isn't in and of itself very interesting. It's
Yeah.
kind of the various character stories along the way that are interesting in that back second half. And ultimately, I enjoyed the game and enjoyed playing it in spite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like having a theme, having something to say is ultimately not that super important. Like it's nice, but
It I don't disagree. It it doesn't have to be super important. You can just tell a good story for telling a good story's sake. But this to me just isn't even that. Uh, and I guess that's ultimately that's a lot of the disappointment I have. Can I tell you guys another thing that really took me out of the
Sure.
experience here? And I put this in the notes, and I also talked to you guys on Slack, referring it to it this way. But and this is also in part why I brought up maybe this has to do with the game being developed in Unity. I don't know if there's a limitation that necessitated this, but every time you go into a just conversation in the middle of a dungeon, it fades out and back in to what I like to call the cutscene dimension,
Mm.
where dialogue bubbles will pop up and they'll talk to one another, and then it fades out and then goes back into where you can freely control your character again. And ordinarily, fine. I'm understanding of the limitations of game development and that might necessitate that. What drives me fucking crazy is how often that happens after walking, say, 5 steps. It will do it repeatedly in every single dungeon, at least for the first half of the game.
Mhm.
And the second half, it's definitely not nearly as bad because we've talked about it. The second half is a lot more gameplay focused, and they
Mm.
don't have as many narrative beats to hit in a lot of those story quests.
Mm.
But my God, is it unbearable walking 5 steps and going back to the cutscene dimension just for them to be like, whoa, what is that? Oh, it looks like more bacteria. Okay, let's go check it out. And then you walk
Yeah.
5 steps to it, and then it fades out, fades back in. Oh my God, this is crazy. Oh, let's keep going. Fades out, fades back in. You walk 5. It happens so much, and it drives me crazy. Because why do
Yeah.
you need to do this every 5 steps, every 5 seconds? Have these pointless little conversations and take me completely out of control. It just adds to the wait time. It really added to my frustrations
I
with this
feel like,
game.
yeah, because that's
Yeah.
something that not even back in the day on PS1 JRPGs, you didn't have that. I
And
feel
that's
like that
why I
might have
bring it
been,
up as
I feel like that might have
potentially.
been a relic of having essentially been a mobile game from how many years ago was it?
I'm bringing it up as potentially that's
4 years
why I
ago
bring
it
up
originally come up?
that's why I bring up the Unity engine. I wonder if it's an engine limitation because it's not like those games were like we're talking about like the old PS1 Final Fantasies. It's not like those were developed in Unity. I don't even know if Unity existed around the time those games were developed. So I don't know if it's an engine limitation. It's certainly a
I'm not even
design.
talking about an engine. Well, that would be an engine, I guess. But then again, yeah, because an iPhone, even in 2021, that would have more probably computing power than an original PlayStation. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
it is. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't. I really don't know. It could just be a relic of the engine that they really couldn't sort out, even
And
for like a remaster on modern consoles. Yeah.
I'm bringing it up as like hopefully it's a limitation of Unity or something because I refuse to believe that they
That's an
thought that that
artistic
was a good
choice.
idea. Right. I
Yeah.
refuse to believe that that's a good that is a choice made in good faith because it I don't know if it drove you guys as crazy as it drove me, but
No,
it
I didn't really notice it, but I do understand what you're saying. Yeah.
and it's
There's a
like
lot of things that drove me crazy about this game.
I
Yeah,
know.
I have a feeling, and I have a feeling like I went in with really no expectations other than I knew Sakaguchi made it and fell in love with it because of the gameplay. I have a feeling, Mark, you specifically were looking way more for the narrative-driven focus of classic Final Fantasy.
No, not necessarily. I was looking I went into it with the same expectation you did, in that it's a Sakaguchi developed or produced and written game that is a JRPG that is calling back to classic Final Fantasy games. Like I went in with the same expectation. I think the thing that kind of maybe spoiled the broth for me going in was like prior to Neo Dimension coming out, and this was when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to commit to actually playing through this game,
Hmm.
rather than playing through it on Apple Arcade. I saw a lot of discussion in like reviews and just people talking about the game that there really isn't much to the story. It really is more combat mechanics focused. And I'm like, okay, well, I really hope that there's some sort of story here. It's like it can't be that bad. And then to for me to get what I actually did get and what actually was presented to me, I was just like, oh, nothing could have prepared me for what this is like, and nothing could have prepared me for how little I was going to like this in
Yeah.
terms of the story.
Like when I play these JRPGs, I play it personally for the narrative. Like I do go
Right.
into it.
I know definitely Delilah. That's why you
Yeah,
didn't like it
like
because you.
100%.
I don't think you enjoy this kind of gameplay to begin with.
Not no, I definitely if the narrative's good, I'll slog through it. But even then in the beginning, like because it's so retro style, there was like a little bit of comfort food that I felt. Like I think that's a big reason why you like it, Jason. It did feel different, but then and we'll get into with the combat. There's so much about it that just felt like it was wasting my time and that it was so incredibly specific that like the second half of the game, I had to pull out a guide. I was just like, there's no way I can enjoy this game and continue this game without it. And I guess we could segue into comment, but if I had to say one good thing about the story is that I'm gonna give y'all a little Valentine's Day card quote to bring with you and put to for your little girlfriends and boyfriends. It's that you're caught in my gravitational field.
Oh yeah, that
That's
is
it.
something that depending on that they can say that and like they read your mother or descendant's diary or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
good.
that was cute. Yeah.
Also, I love how you say, "Oh, you're talking to the audience." I thought you were talking to Jason and I. I'm like, Delilah, we're both married.
Yeah, you guys. Unless you're trying to make a baby, I don't think you need any pro tips there.
Yeah. But but to the listeners and I guess to you guys as well, I want to emphasize that like I do agree. There's technically a story there, and at best, it is decent.
I feel like we've spent the last hour and a half
Yeah.
reiterating the same point.
The reason I love this game is not because of the story. Although I did like a lot of the characters And if anything, I just wish we had more actual
Yeah.
character interaction.
I think the problem is that characters don't a story make, you know? You do need some.
If you can get by with a pretty paper thin plot, and if you have good enough characters,
Sure, but I don't.
characters are absolutely the most important part of a story.
But I don't think
People.
these characters stand out that much
No, 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 no. They
to
don't.
really set this game apart,
No,
you
no,
know?
no, no, absolutely not. But
Yeah.
like, just to use an example, Star Wars, the original Star Wars would not have blown up like it did without. Those are exceptionally charismatic and singular characters. Well, at least
Oh,
Han
yeah, but
and Luke, yeah.
it's
Even
also
Leia to an extent, but yeah.
but also Star Wars is a pretty solid plot.
No, it is, but what I'm saying is that it would not have taken off as it did without that.
Sure, but my point is it was still a solid plot.
No, no,
This
I
is
agree with
not a
you. I
solid
agree.
plot.
I
Yeah.
agree with you. No, no, I'm
Yeah.
agreeing with you, and I'm agreeing that the characters like are not that super stand out. But I
Yeah.
didn't. I'm just saying I enjoyed them enough.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, I feel like I'm being really, and I also like, I feel like I didn't, I meant to say this and I didn't get a chance to before, and I do want to just say, like, the voice acting was not bad, it was not terrible, it just, there were things about it that I didn't like, and I don't want to downplay the voice actors' work because they were all like,
This was not Wook Lamont levels for Final Fantasy 14
oh,
players,
stop it,
which again was not the voice actor's fault. That was a director. But anyway, if you
yeah.
know, you know. We don't need to get
Stop
into
it.
it.
Don't bring Wuklamad into this, you monster.
Uh,
It's go ahead, Delilah.
I was gonna say, are we gonna move on to combat?
Yeah,
Because
that's where
I'd
we're
like to
going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
start.
I'm about to. I just want to say,
Mark's
like,
just summarizing, just to make it, so people understand, like it comes off as very negative.
It is
yeah,
negative.
and I'm not.
Well, I know, but this, which is why I'm trying to highlight the positives. But
But
the reality is that like, uh, it's like aside from the plot not tying together, which the individual like character stories are not bad. Like the voice acting is not
I'm
bad, the music's not bad. It's really just the plot doesn't, the main overarching plot doesn't tie everything together. The individual stories along the way are decent enough.
it's
Yeah,
like
Cheryl's made me cry for sure.
it's like nothing surrounding the narrative is good enough to save it, and that's kind of where I'm at. Like everything, nothing is outstanding about the presentation of this game.
Right.
And that to me is just like what I'm a little down on. And what I was trying to get to about the voice acting is just that, like, what I do commend about this game is that none of the voice talent are like super recognizable names, at least not from what I could tell as the credits rolled by. So they did employ like a lot of, I would think, amateur, newer, and you know, fresher voice talent, and I think that's really commendable. And I just wish they were kind of directed a little better, I guess, in terms of their performances. Especially, again, not to keep throwing damage at a character whose design I adored, but Valrika's performance, even just like, I guess just the direction of her dialogue was, I understand
She's
what they
not
were going for, but
patched,
it just
yeah.
came off very, very strange.
She had cyborg vibes.
Yeah, and I didn't like that, even though I liked her design a
Yeah,
lot. But anyway,
Again, it probably would have made up for it had they actually delved more into the character. As we said, she was kind of wasted a bit.
yeah, she really was. Okay, now I think we're ready to stop bashing the story and talk about the combat and the kind of the more gameplay systems, the things that this game is really substantially better at. So I guess let's talk a bit about the combat. Delilah, you were gonna say something.
I just wanted to start because I know you guys really liked it,
Mhm.
and I didn't. And it wasn't just because of the turn based, because I actually really like the dimension system so that you weren't getting into fights every few seconds. I like that each character had its own direction. So like some could go straight through, some could arc around, some had AoE attacks. So that made like strategizing combat a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. So I did really, really like that. My and free respec, that was so cool.
Yeah.
Especially like
necessary. Yeah.
necessary to go into different like strategies. My problem is the boss fights, and I know this was the strength for you guys, which is why I wanted to speak first, because for me, like, and I'll also comment on like Jason saying it's like from software. for me, I don't like when I have to do something extremely specific to succeed in a boss fight. And I felt like for this game, everything was so specific. Like I had to use certain abilities, or I had to, and this is not just simple like exploiting weaknesses based on elements. This is more so like what abilities to use at what time, and why using a guide helped me deal with it a lot better is because, sorry, my cat just put his paw in my hand and it's so cute. So my brain just like went, oh.
Dopamine released.
Release. I love this game all of a sudden. Why it bothered me, and I enjoyed it more when I used a guide, because I was like, okay, well now I'm not sitting here for hours beating my head against the wall trying to figure out what's the best strategy for this boss. Because I really don't have time. And these boss fights are not short; they're pretty long.
Some of them are really long.
Even if you have the right strategy. So I was really, and there's a lot of boss fights, a lot of boss fights. So that was my frustration. And I don't like, and why it's different from software games is from software games don't tell me how to beat bosses. I beat the boss the way I want to based on the build that I want. And so I build the characters the way I want to, and I can find a way to succeed. And yeah, I might need to change things here and there and change my strategy. But for this game, I felt like I needed a very specific strategy for the bosses. And I will admit that using those strategies helped me become a better, like, help my strategy improve overall, because there were things I didn't think about, like using quick all in certain scenarios so that I could not get my head bashed in.
I think you mean every scenario, not
almost
just
every scenario. Yeah, you have to use quick all, or like, like having to use like Tan's ability in that frog fight, like his tension ability at the end to be able to succeed and get enough damage dealt to that specific boss. Like I started to think a little bit more critically in how specific I had to use those bosses, so it did make me a better player. But at the same time, I hate that it was so specific and that I had to use a guide in order to succeed. With that said, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that okay, how can I say this? I don't like artificial difficulty in games. And
Nor
I felt
do
like
I.
this game had a lot of artificial difficulty where it's just the boss health bar too big and the damage they do too large to you, and the damage you do, even if you're exploiting their weaknesses and having a pretty good strategy, not that much. And I can't stand that even for an action game. So,
Right.
like, I'm thinking about
We've
like
said
the
this.
Division.
We've said the same thing about like Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erd Tree.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the final boss. Exactly. So, that's what I have to say about the combat overall. So that's why I was just so done with this game. I'm glad to be done.
I need to respond to that immediately.
Okay.
So on the last part, I totally agree with you with big health bars and stuff. I think your view of that is being colored a little too much by the final boss, which yes, that definitely applies, especially health. The overwhelming majority of these bosses actually have very small health pools. They're bolstered by certain mechanics, especially when you compare, like the first phase of the final boss has 100k health. Most bosses have throughout the game have at most 150, but are also much easier to. They have far less defense and attack. So
they
I
do start
do
bloating
think
up toward the end.
toward the very end. I think a lot of what
But
you
I think earlier than you're thinking, though. Maybe it's just because we did the more of the side content than you did.
I was gonna say a lot of this because I did a lot of the side content bosses too. So I'm thinking of like the sandworm.
Maybe side quest bosses. Yeah. But that aside, that's not even the most important part. I would actually vehemently disagree that you need to beat something a certain way. Case in point, you just mentioned quick all. I was unable to unlock quick all. I did not use quick all at all throughout. I barely used quick. Um, I would actually argue that part of the reason why this game is as fun as it is because so many strategies are viable. Um, I didn't even realize how potent, for instance, the ability guard was until the very end of the game. And technically speaking, like to use a fight like Ribbon on Rex, for example, yes, you can kind of cheese it using the tension ability of Tan, but you did not need to use that to beat the game. That's just what that one Neo Seeker most popular guy did, and it is viable. But using the proper strategy, You can beat fights so many different ways, being prepared beforehand after going in for your first encounter and learning. For example, you can use certain gems to nullify different effects, but you don't have to do that to beat them. In fact, I didn't do that for a lot of fights, and just um, brute forced my way through them, only learning later on that you could use those gems to basically nullify a mechanic. Um, there is so much both strategic and tactical depth. A lot of it really comes down to so much is per- so much, and this was true of classic Final Fantasy as well. 50 to 60% of the battle is how your character is kitted out and prepared beforehand. Um, that the strategic level really all happens before the battle, and then it comes down to execution and tactical adjustments during the battle. Um, So I would vehemently disagree that there's one specific way to do it. In fact, I think part of the reason this game was so fun is how much variation and how many different ways you can go about it.
So I one thing I do want to say is I love with this episode how kind of we're all of different like differing opinions about this one. Like it's pretty drastic like how all over the place the three of us are in opinion. Um and that leads me into uh it's not so much like the specific actions that you use. Let me preface. I mostly agree with Delilah. It does require very specific strategies for pretty much every boss fight. Using certain actions does not entail necessarily the strategy. Like I wouldn't call using quick all a strategy, right? It's just an action that's really fucking helpful because you don't need to necessarily use it to get by. It just really helps to use it. Uh, and the thing you're talking about, Jason, of not equipping certain gems that would make life so much easier. Like, yeah, I brute forced a lot of fights because I didn't want to fucking switch out my gemstones. I hate doing that. I hate switching out gemstones. I hate switching out anything in my inventory on a regular basis or my equipment on a regular basis. It drives me crazy in any video game ever. It's why I've always like gone on and on about having multiple loadouts as options. Like, please just give me loadouts. With this game, it's like at least it's pretty simple. Like you only have 2 gemstone slots max. And then there's other equipment that can do similar abilities that your gemstones can do. So like it's not too bad to switch things out when you have to. Really the problem is I think the UI is incredibly clunky in this game. Um that I'll go ahead
And
and
you
say
can't,
like
and when you're switching out, but
huh?
yeah, when you're switching out, especially if you have multiple gems equipped by multiple people, if you like, you can't choose who switches it out, and it can get confusing. Yeah,
It's like not even
I
that.
I agree with you about the
I just feel like it's not even just like that. Yes, I like for sure, but it's also just like it just looks clunky. Like it's a game where like the UI is how you can really
It looks
tell it
like a
was built.
mobile game. Yeah,
Yes, it really looks like it. They didn't
yeah.
change the menus from the touchscreen controls on an iPhone, and I feel like that kind of sucks because it really shows. Um, but
and
like
and
yeah,
the way the growth map respecking works, yeah, it's you can totally tell it was built with touch in mind. Yeah,
yeah, but like, so what I'm essentially trying to say though is like certain boss fights, like no, there is absolutely a strategy you need to follow in order to fight the boss. Like there are certain party members that you need to use, and there's certain skills that they need to have in order for you to be successful for certain boss fights. And I don't have a problem with that because the game at least offers everything to you to switch that stuff around freely. Like Delilah, you brought up free spec. Like if there were several times where it would be more beneficial for Cheryl to not have the debuff skills that I had given her and to have concentrate and charge. So okay, I completely removed every skill on the one side of her tree and gave her all the skills on the other side of the tree. And boom, that fit the strategy that was needed to get through the boss fight. Did I necessarily need to do that? I mean, I'm sure I could have gotten by it without having to do something like that, but that's not what the game wants you to do. And you can kind of tell on a lot of those boss fights that that's not what the game wants you to do.
I
And
think I think I think we're having a problem here with terms. So you keep saying strategy. You're talking about mechanics. So
right, and
focusing on having quick all and defense up, those aren't just actions. That's a strategy. You go in knowing, all right, I'm going to use this character to do this, focus on keeping this. That's a strategy, and then the execution of it. You're talking
I
about mechanics of different. Yeah.
and I more so think that that's okay. So maybe it's a difference of how we're using the terminology, but really that's what I think that's what Delilah was getting at, and what I am also in agreement with. And to me, using basic skills, like having Ez throw an attack all buff on everybody, is to me is not a strategy. It's just an action that helps. Like that to me, that's not a strategy, because that I could leave that out and still probably succeed. But why would I leave it out when it's just going to benefit me? To
Yeah,
me,
right.
that's not a
Like I
strategy.
said, yeah, like I said, I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have quick all, but like to use an example of what you're saying, what I mean by strategy is, for example, there is a mechanic in the second phase of the final boss whereby he for Magna Ray, where there are you can't damage the boss, but there are two orbs. You can choose to destroy those orbs if you want, or you can do what I did, which is buff everybody's defense and tank it using guard.
Yeah, and I think for
That's a
I think
strategy. That's a strategic choice.
I see. I'm going to push back on that, because there's, for the most part, no way you could destroy those things. I think the game intends for you to tank it. There's several things where you can target it and you can try to damage it and get rid of it before it goes off, but there's
You
unless
could get
you're
like one, maybe.
yeah, it's like there's for the most part, I think the game very much intends for you to uh guard and just tank it. And to me, that's like that is the strategy that you
I
need
can't. I
to
mean, I can't.
employ to address that mechanic. I think we're getting too caught up on
I can't speak to
terminology
it because I didn't try
usage.
to destroy them. Yeah,
Okay, I think
Well,
we're
yeah.
getting too caught up in
All
terminology
I'm, all,
usage.
yeah.
What
Okay.
I'm ultimately trying to say is that I do agree with the sentiment that the game's boss fights like mostly in the second half, because the first half is much easier, uh do require you to employ a certain type of play style in order to get through them. And I like that. And I normally don't like that, but I like that here, because to me, that is the combat. It's like a puzzle. Every boss fight you go into is a puzzle that you need to solve, and solving it entails kitting out your characters properly, figuring out which ones you're going to use, what skills they need, and then going into the boss fight and solving it. And that's to me how I viewed it. That's to me what made it work so well for me and why I enjoyed it so much. It's not about like
I would
uh,
agree with that sentiment. It's
yeah,
just I disagree that there's only one solution to the puzzle.
it's like yeah, okay. But I'm not necessarily saying that there's one solution. I'm saying there is the intended solution, and the game's design, the boss's design, really makes it clear
Yeah,
that there is the.
there's an optimal solution. Yes.
I'm not going optimal. I'm going intended. Could you do it another way and just like or tank through it in a different way? Have a harder time? Yeah, but it's a harder time. The boss fights are pretty well designed.
clarify.
What's that?
That's why I wanted to clarify. Like, Jason, when you say you brute force it, are you like implementing your own strategy from your brain and like beating it in the first like two tries? Or are you like fighting these boss fights over and over again and figuring
Yeah.
out what strategy succeeds?
It usually at most took me for most of the bosses, a lot of them I didn't even die the first time. It really wasn't until later where it would take one or two tries to figure out, and then maybe on the second or third I beat it once I understand what the mechanics are of the fight. And also keep in mind, like I was never at the recommended level. I was always at least 4 to 5 levels beneath. And I know that the guy who did the guide that everybody follows was like 7 or 8 levels beneath,
Yeah,
which is where I
actually,
was towards the
shout
end.
shout out to Valheim on Neoseeker, because I'm pretty sure that's the guide everyone uses for this game. And yeah, like
Is there any
Yes.
other guide?
there's like one other, and I closed it pretty much immediately because I didn't like how it was structured.
Mm.
So yeah, shout out to the Valheim on Neoseeker for that Fantasian guide. It's uh a little
The
out of
point being
sorts
is
in
I
some
beat
places,
most of
but it's
these.
overall good.
I went back and read through his guide. I beat most of this shit completely differently than he did. Um,
I mean, what are you, Jason? You
I
will
guess
you
I guess the
always
only
dare to be
my only
different.
point here, but I guess my point here is that Mark, I would agree with you. The joy I found from this game was the puzzle elements. not just even of the bosses, like the Neo Dimension, the individual mob, like the using positioning and trying to
Yeah,
play
that
this
was
little
fun.
game where I try to kill them all, without one of them getting an attack on me, which is just my own invented thing. But
Yeah, yeah.
I found that extremely fun. And as for the boss fights, I agree with you that there is an intended way, probably, that the developers wanted you. All I'm saying is that there were a lot of options, and I never felt roped in that I had to do one until the end. And to get to Delilah's point of artificial difficulty, there were a few bosses. I've already mentioned one in Tan's story, of artificial difficulty that I don't like. I just don't agree that there was as many as you were insinuating there were. I actually felt that the health pools were pretty slim until like the final, I'd say 15 to 20% of the game.
And
It was more focused on executing the mechanics.
you did all the optional stuff too, right?
Yeah, almost all.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I just missed Ez's because I didn't realize it was even there.
Well,
Yeah.
his the thing to get his like ultimate weapon, if you want to call it that, was like a genuine side quest. Uh, you probably did like his final story thing, which was just like protecting the house
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the guild
And then
again.
you get the upgraded Neo Dimension thing
Well, that's a side
from
quest.
one of the kids.
That's a side quest
Oh,
as well. Yeah, yeah,
I thought that was all right. Never mind.
yeah.
But
But
yes, I did
anyway,
defend them from yeah.
yeah, that's like the final like story beat for Ez, but like the upgraded Dimension device and getting his like ultimate weapon again, quote unquote, because I think on New Game Plus you get stronger weapons for everybody or can upgrade to stronger weapons. That's all done like through genuine side quests, not main quests that you don't necessarily have to do. But yeah,
Which is probably why I ended up missing it, because I prioritized story diagnosed quests. Yeah.
yeah, and that that's fine. It's just it is a really helpful weapon because it's got all status ailment and all, which
Yeah.
is so
Oh,
good.
I know. Yeah.
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 Um.
Anything that gives you all status ailments. Yeah. And
Yeah.
debuffs. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like I get what you're saying, Jason. I know like there's the intended solution, and that's not you're not necessarily always at least shoehorned into that avenue in order to beat a boss. But for the most part, it's like if there's a barrier on someone and it takes 5 hits to get rid of the barrier, are you going to have 5 individual attacks take that barrier out, or are you going to use Valrika's arrow rain and get it done in one hit? Like,
Or Madara. Yeah.
huh? Or what?
Leo's Madara. I call it Madara
Oh,
because I'm a Final Fantasy
Sam.
14 samurai
Yeah,
man, but it's like Sid Madara, Samare, whatever.
got it. Yeah, no, it's
But
like
even right there are 2 different characters you can do it with.
right, right. There's 2 different characters you can do it with, but my point being
Actually,
though
there's
is that
3 because of the gun attack with Perkler. Yeah.
but that one sucks. It's so
It's
inaccurate.
unreliable. Yeah,
Yeah.
it sucks outside of yeah.
But what I'm getting at is there's call and response, right? The game presents you with this thing. There are obvious things that you should use in order to address it. They're not the end all be all. You can do other things, but the game is clearly designed with these characters having these actions, and these are the circumstances you would ideally use them in. Um,
Oh no,
so
sure, for sure. I agree that the developers had that intention. But keep in mind, technically, you can get to the final boss with just the characters that
oh,
you
I
enter
know.
part 2 with. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and again, why the fuck would anyone do that? But
I
anyway,
mean, why the fuck would anybody beat Elden Ring with just a loincloth and a club? But people have done it.
yeah,
That's
that's
what
true.
that is specifically why I make that comparison.
Well, yeah.
Is
Also, I
you got
think
to enjoy that base gameplay. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's another part of my issue is that I didn't want to dedicate so much time to get good in this game, and so that's why I succumbed to a guide, and I really don't like to do that generally. So that's another thing. I don't think I'm good enough at these types of games. Like I am. I'm not saying I'm like a god in like from software games. Like no, I'm serviceable, but I'm willing to learn and die over and over again and figure things out differently and try things new in those games. Whereas in this game, I'm like, can I just be done with this shit? And I think that's
Yeah.
also part of the reason why I hit
Yeah,
my head against this game.
I didn't bring up the guide, or you not enjoying this kind of gameplay as much to like put you down or say you're not as good. I'm
Oh no, I'm
simply
not.
trying to explain why I think why there's such a gap between two perspectives. Is that I love this kind of gameplay where as long as for you, I think as long as other aspects of the game are there to keep you hooked, like with metaphor, with the story and those elements, you're down for it. I may, and also I pointed out the guide mostly to kind of, I guess, try to convey how a lot of this game I enjoyed discovering stuff, whether it was in the open world or during the combat. A lot of things that I didn't even figure out until after, getting to the end of the game. Um,
The fact
Whereas
that
I feel
you
like
were
maybe just reading off of a guide wasn't as enjoyable for you.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The fact that you were able to beat most of these bosses brute forcing it without certain abilities, it just shows like the skill gap between like me and you. And
Well, it's also experience. Is like these are the games. I
your cup of
mentioned
tea,
with the
yeah.
final boss how I was like flashbacks to Necron from FF9. If you know, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Um. Okay. And besides the difficulty, I guess, of like the boss fights and stuff, like we haven't actually talked much about like the combat, which, as far as I'm concerned, is like a mix between Final Fantasy X and Chrono Trigger.
Mm.
Positionals and
Yes,
and being able to freely aim certain attacks while having the CTB, I think was what they called FF10's combat or battle system. Basically, you could just like all the turns are in a row, presented to you, and there's certain actions you can do to manipulate them and change them around. Um,
and you can
but you
swap out
see
characters mid battle.
you exactly swap out characters mid battle is a huge one, and that's also partly why, like, talking about the how there's an intended solution to certain fights and certain bosses is like they really remove the barriers for you to freely solve that puzzle, and swapping out party members freely is a huge barrier that they raise up that you don't have to deal with, and I think it's really important to why the combat is so good. um so yeah, and I really like that idea of dimension. I don't really have a problem with random encounters, but I think the idea behind collecting them and then fighting them all at once is really clever. That's like the biggest innovation this game brings to the table, in my opinion.
Totally.
Is that, and it plays in
And
really well
really
with how the combat
utilizing the
is.
positional on the field. Yeah,
Yeah, like we're like Jason, I did the same exact thing you described, where I made it a personal challenge with every dimension battle to ensure that the enemies never got a turn. And
Hmm.
sometimes I would succeed, sometimes I'd fail, but it's okay. Especially as you start developing those growth trees, you start getting counters on everybody.
Hmm.
It's like no matter what, they could hit you, but you're still going to destroy them for the most part. Um, and yeah, I thought the
yep.
Dimension was fantastic, really cool.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
and to go a little bit more into it, I really liked the progression overall. I mean, it's a pretty linear leveling system, and then you get the growth tree, and that lets you learn a lot of really cool skills. Start getting characters to learn skills that other people usually have. Basically, Cheryl and Valrika become the dark and
Darkness
ice
Ice Girls.
queens. Yeah, like anything weak to dark or ice is just getting demolished with those two in the party.
Hmm.
Um,
Which is
the
a lot of things towards the end. Yeah,
yeah,
Hmm.
the biggest problem I have, which I made, I vocalized to you guys plenty. Why the fuck is the growth tree introduced halfway through the game? That is a baffling design decision to me. And I know you're going to say, Jason, that it's tied to the narrative, and I understand that. I'm saying restructure it so that it's not, or that it's
no,
introduced earlier.
no. What I was actually going to say was, I don't know if they even planned to have it in originally.
Well,
I was
I don't
gonna
know.
say it
This is the
feels
thing. I
almost
don't know
like
how much.
so and let me provide some context. Part one ends after you fight that boss in the Chaos Realm, like that worm in the one like pool or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's when part one ends. You are given the growth tree before that when you're in the Chaos Realm, when you're on your way,
Mm.
basically before you've even met Valrika. So they introduced the growth tree right before the end of the content you could play in part one.
Okay, fair enough. I honestly I don't
What
know.
the fuck?
Like, and this is why I said earlier, like they must have had trouble in development just figuring out how to narratively loop all the different aspects and quests and whatnot together and still keep it so open. Um, and I don't know what contributed to it being released in two parts. I don't know if that was just a consequence of difficulties in development or if they made an entire game and cut it in two. I have no idea. I don't know enough about the development of this game outside of the cool shit they did with the environments.
Yeah,
With how
and we'll get to
different it
that.
is narratively and gameplay wise from the first half to the second half, I wouldn't be surprised if like the overall team that worked on it was not completely different, but mostly different. Because it feels like not two different games, but like they're very distinct from one another.
Yeah.
Where the narrative I
Yes,
feel
they
like was
are.
stronger in the first half and not so much in the second half, but the gameplay I think for most people that like this genre was better in the second half than it was in the first half.
I just like from a structure perspective, I don't understand why part one didn't end after beating Vam. Like that's a massive cliffhanger to leave everyone on. Finish part one then, and it ends before they can introduce an entirely new mechanic that is intrinsically important to the progression of this game. Right at the end of the thing you can play for the next 5 or 6 months, it's just
Mm.
Well,
crazy to me.
if I have to, I know that there was a, a quote from Sakaguchi before part two came out where he said that part two was going to be at least twice as long. I think maybe his idea was that part one was essentially a prologue, even though it's fairly long. People were saying it took them like 20 hours. I think for me, what constitutes part one maybe it took somewhere between 12 and 15 hours. I can't
I'd say
remember.
about 15, but even so, that it is the primary
I still
progression
agree with
system of
you.
the yeah,
Yeah, I
like
still agree with you,
it's
but
the primary progression system. Why is it introduced halfway through the game? It
Yeah.
just it makes no sense to me. It's a baffling design decision. I don't know what they were thinking with that because like if you just even think from a release perspective, which luckily we didn't have to deal with, right? But like if I played this game on April 1st, 2021 and I finished part 1 and I got this whole like skill tree progression system right at the end and then I literally have to wait I said 5 or 6 months. It was really 4 months, but I had to wait 4 more months to have anything to do with that growth tree, to have it to be able to grind out and earn anything for it. Because I think they capped the levels of part 1 at level like 35. So you couldn't
Mhm.
progress past that to introduce that late, I don't understand. It's so strange.
I wonder,
no,
like,
I agree.
I was gonna say maybe they just wanted you to be like people who don't play these types of games to be weaned into the like basic mechanics of these types of games. But I don't think you have a game this sweaty, especially when it released initially with only one difficulty, and
Yeah.
expect like new players to be weaned into it.
Yeah, I guess, and that's another thing. I guess I know where we all stand with for the most part with the difficulty because for those who don't know, I guess I didn't really explain this, but Neo Dimension, the new release of this game, um adds the voice acting. I don't think there was much voice acting in the original, if any at
Yeah,
all.
I think there was none in the original.
And added some additional just like language settings, but like the I guess the big thing from a gameplay perspective was it added a normal difficulty and it made the original difficulty, of which there was only one, you did not have a choice, the game you played was as difficult as it was, that was made into hard, and that was due to a lot of feedback that the game was too hard.
Mhm.
So they made an easy mode that was dubbed the normal mode, and the only difficulty of the original was made hard. I don't want to know
Oh my god.
what that final boss fight is like on hard mode, because man, that was a rough fight even on normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably my experience, because you guys were all kitted out for that final boss fight.
And it was still tough as hell.
Yeah.
I got it my first try only because I used a guide, and I was glad I did.
I got it my first try. Did I get it my first try? I think I got it no, I might have died to yeah, I think I did die once actually. And like after dying, like I learned from some of the mechanics that I saw. I switched out some gemstones on my characters. I went back in and I was able to beat it after like an hour of fighting it. It was just a very long, grueling process.
Yeah, same. Like I died like very shortly into the second part, which there's not really a break for.
Yeah.
But after a very long second run on the first two phases, and by long I mean like it was over an hour of a war of attrition, with me primarily just healing, guarding, defending, and occasionally attacking. But eventually, that's what I mean when I say brute force Delilah. Eventually, I just brute forced him down. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to do the third one.
Yeah.
I,
Well,
I
you
mean,
tried.
I did. I
You
tried.
did try. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Do you
numerically, I couldn't do it because I was lacking a certain thing.
Yeah.
do you think that you'll like go back and get what you need for that fight and finish it, or are you gonna keep brute forcing your way, or are you just
Oh yeah, for sure.
drop it?
I could. I just didn't have time, for this
But
recording to do
do you
that.
think you're going to, and like after this real episode releases, are you gonna go back and try to finish it?
Yo, man, they're resetting ranks in fucking Marvel Rivals. I worked my ass off to get
Wait,
to
when
the
is
top
the
of.
I'm
Oh
sorry,
no,
Mark. I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
Get out of
Message
here.
me when the reset is on Slack, please.
No, but in all seriousness, I probably will at some point and go back and beat it just so I can beat it, because I do appreciate the game, and I do
Yeah.
want to be able to say that I beat that final part.
Hey, Delilah, he should go do it after we do our Final Fantasy IX episode, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, to continue the arc of
Is there an easy mode?
JRPG Let's Torture Delilah arc.
Yeah.
I think this game made me done with turn-based RPGs for like 3 years.
3 years.
And I really wanted to go back
Oh.
and play Chrono Trigger this year, so now that's not happening.
No. You should, A, because Chrono Trigger is
Hey,
the best JRPG of all time, arguably, and B, because it's only like 15 to 20 hours long.
let's do an episode on that. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
In 2027.
Oh, come on. All right. Anyway, back to this fucking game. The other thing I wanted to talk about with just like the combat system, and something I actually really appreciate about it, is this game is not one that lets you just do the classic like JRPG player mentality of I have 40 elixirs and I can never use them. Like I can only use them in an event where I really need them. This game does not let you do that, and I really, really appreciate that. Like you get a lot of items in this game, and it basically forces you to use them, and not just through Ez, who's like his whole gameplay style is one. He's probably my most used character in the game because of the buffs that he gives, and they cost items, and you just stock up on items. Eventually you're going to have more than enough money to just always stay stocked up and to always use them. And even outside of that, like I have so many elixirs, and if a character's low on health and the situation's dire, I'm going to fucking use one. And this game basically forces you to do that. And I really appreciate that, because not many JRPGs will kind of force you into that situation. And this one dares to do it, and I really like that.
It also does something which I was not expecting, but it does add to the amount of foresight and thought you have to put into actions. There's no like in classic Final Fantasy, you would have special Phoenix Downs that would fully heal characters, but no, here you have to be reliant on skills that so that you don't have items that lessen certain skills like resurrection, which fully heal, not only resurrects dead characters but fully heals them. There's no way around that with items like there would be, or like for example, items that heal all characters. No, you need to use you need to be using your skills, so you need to think about even more so
which
the value
includes
of each characters.
which can include using items. It's just a very specialized character that can do that.
Right. But
Um,
I was more thinking like there's no heal all potion like there would be in other
well, no,
JRPGs. Yeah.
I'm essentially agreeing with you
Yeah, yeah.
because that's a skill that only one character can use, and you
And
are
uses
relying on
all
your
and uses 3 potions. Yeah.
yeah, and also like what I really like is that when he does that, though, that heals all characters for more than just using a single one of that item would, which is
Right.
I really it almost makes it more worthwhile to if only one character is badly damaged, to just pop his all potion L or whatever,
Yeah.
because it's going to heal them for more, even though it might be a net loss in potions. And at the same time, if you have item saver, you might not
Right.
even be using any potions. So, uh,
I am so glad you brought that up because I hadn't even thought about that. I'm typically a chronic hoarder in video games, and I always end games with all this stuff that I barely
mhm.
used. And when I first started playing as I was like, I hate this. I miss the girls. Give me Kina and Cheryl back. I want to be healed using my skills. I don't want to waste my items. It was like really hard for me to like let go. And then when I realized how freaking necessary as is in almost all situations, I was just like, damn, like it's kind of nice to be forced to use these items, kind of. Even though at first I was like really struggling with it.
If
And yeah,
anything, go ahead. Go
everything
ahead.
was
Sorry.
so it was just all very useful and became really viable as a strategy
Yeah.
Right.
later.
If anything, I feel like this is the game that might break that habit. For me, like I'd be curious to see what my mentality is like if I go and play an older Final Fantasy again, and be
Right,
like, do I still hoard these items, or do I actually use them more openly thanks to Fantasian?
right.
Um, it's just, but there's also a big difference in acquisition, right? Like Fantasian is constantly throwing items at you.
And
It's
you
Yeah.
have
rare that
passive skills where you just get items during battle.
yeah,
And
it's
you could
like
buy items too.
yeah, and like I said, like Kina has a passive skill that increases the money gain, and pretty shortly after unlocking that, I was I can't say gillionaire. I was a millionaire of G because that's the currency for some
Hmm.
fucking reason. Um,
Skill.
I
Come on.
but they even say it in voice line, that it's called
G's. Yeah.
G, and it's just
Yeah. I
like,
know.
come, okay, you can't call it gold. You can't even rip Gil like G, really.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if like if they were in the background during development trying to dance around potential copyright. Because keep in mind, like there was until recently. Well, actually, at this point, a lot of that animosity probably was gone. But
Yeah, I wouldn't say that animosity has been around for a long time, but that is
more
another thing for the info block that I neglected to bring up, is that Neo Dimension, while the original release of Fantasian was not, Neo Dimension was published by
by
Square
Square
Enix.
Enix. Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of the first time there's been some semblance of a business relationship between Sakaguchi and Square Enix since he left the company.
I guess. I
Actually,
guess.
that's not true. Terra Battle had crossover stuff with Square.
I guess. I
Um,
guess what I was really trying to get at is that they might have. There might have been discussions behind the scenes of what names can we use that we used in Final Fantasy, and what do we have to kind of make slightly different for potential legal reasons.
yeah,
Even if they weren't necessarily, even if Square Enix wouldn't have necessarily pursued it, they still probably just wanted to be safe.
Mm.
right. So, yeah, it's anyway.
What did you guys
Um,
think of the labyrinths in this game?
I liked them.
Yeah, they're very reminiscent of very old school computer RPGs.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you did not like them, I sense.
Mm-mm. No. I didn't hate them as much as I hated when you had to go through the place in it starts with a T in the machine realm where you had to like activate all these uh machines. What are they called? Oh my god. Brain fart. It
Yeah,
was
I'm
towards
trying
the
to
end of
remember
the
what you're
game.
talking about.
You had to activate all these terminals to progress towards the boss. And it was really confusing. The
Okay.
enigmatic factory?
Oh,
Oh, the
yeah.
the thaumaturgy, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like
Oh, you're
that.
talking about the Omega Quest, right?
Yes. Oh, yes,
Yeah,
it's the side quest. You're right.
yeah.
The Omega
Which
quest.
another, obvious Final Fantasy pull is
Yeah,
having a
the
boss called
hidden,
Omega.
the secret
Yeah.
super boss. Yeah,
Yeah. Um so yeah, I didn't mind the labyrinths. I actually really liked them. There's one that is discoverable in New Game Plus when you get to N that is there's no combat, there's no enemies in it, but it's huge. Like it's a massive, massive labyrinth, and it's very easy to get lost in. It's like whatever size the trial ones were, like quadruple that, and this is the labyrinth that I ran into.
Hmm.
I mean,
Um,
I guess what I like the most about the labyrinths that are in the game, and this also includes just dungeon design in general. Partially because as I've said a couple times, the modular design, but also because this is just how Sakaguchi's dungeon design has always been.
Hmm.
Um, Short, simple, direct. Um, it very much contrasts with criticisms I had of Remake and Rebirth, where that dungeon design philosophy is things that were a couple of screens in older games got
Yeah.
elongated into hours long slogs. I feel like here I love how it's not too short, but it's enough where reliably in a few screens there's going to be a save point.
True.
Um, so it felt like I could play a dungeon and in an hour I can get through easily through a dungeon, even two, and beat a boss. Um,
Yeah.
it felt well paced in that sense.
True.
um, I guess it's kind of somewhat shifting gears, but still kind of on the same topic. Another like big claim to fame with this game is that the environments that you're walking through are all built on real life dioramas.
They're so cute. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, what I some of them look better than others. I
Sure.
do really appreciate the fact that as much as this game is calling back to older JRPGs, particularly one Sakaguchi worked on in the past, for better or worse. There's some good things about that nostalgia grasping. There's some bad things about it. But what I do like is the fact that these real life dioramas are kind of a more modernized pre-rendered background
I
in the
still,
sense
yeah, I
that
still prefer
they're
the pre-rendered, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
I mean, I don't necessarily. It depends, like, right? Because you could have some really bad pre-rendered backgrounds. You could have some really great ones, really memorable ones. It's more so just like it's a callback to that kind of idea, that kind of design philosophy, while still being something fresh, something new, something innovative, and something interesting.
Right.
And it also allows for them to have that kind of that pre-rendered mentality of just superimposing the characters onto something that's already there, but also allowing them to have a 3D space to kind of hide treasure in, and you kind of do have to do a little more exploration than you normally would on pre-rendered
And the
areas.
camera still moves more with you as opposed to, I mean, the camera moved a little bit in some pre-rendered back in the day, but it was
It
limited in how
mostly
much.
just shifts across the background,
Yeah,
really.
here it can actually spin as it follows you. So there are advantages to using the diorama. I just prefer the old painterly pre-rendered because you could do more detail with it.
Yeah, but I think for what they accomplished with these dioramas, because I mean, you think about how many environments there are in this game, there's probably more than you realize. And they had to build
Don't
a
get me wrong.
diorama for all of those.
Don't
Hmm.
get me wrong. I absolutely adore this and what they did here, and it gives it its own style. I'm just saying, if I had to choose,
No, yeah, I'm not trying to pose a pick and choose kind of thing.
yeah,
I'm mostly saying that I appreciate that they still kind of call back to that classical feel, but with something genuinely new. Um,
you can tell there's a lot of love put into it, a lot of craftsmanship, and it's
yeah,
something that you would never see in a modern AAA game.
no,
I'm
no.
a sucker
Yeah,
for Godzilla movies, so this was like totally something that I vibed with.
yeah,
The only thing I didn't like is sometimes the perspective shifts. You would have to like change the direction you're walking in, or else it would go back.
Yeah,
yeah. The camera could be a problem, and a lot of people have complained about that. Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
the same. It's the thing that kept jumping to my mind is like Resident Evil, right? And
Yeah.
why tank controls existed and why they worked is
Hmm.
right.
because when the camera does shift in the environment, and classic Resident Evil also used pre-rendered backgrounds. So when the camera does shift in the environment, it's your movement on the D-pad is relative to which direction the character's facing, not which way you're pressing the button.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really work in this game because it's always where you're pointing the stick, and when the
Mhm.
camera shifts, the slightest shift in your thumb on the stick is going to cause the character to move in a wildly different direction than the one they were already going in.
Mhm.
I think there is a setting that you can change in the config settings to change the movement type.
Mhm.
But I didn't play around with that. I could be mistaken about it.
Again, that could also be a relic of being designed for a touchscreen, where
True.
when the camera moves, your finger doesn't move, as opposed to a thumbstick.
It is
Mhm.
somewhat the same principle though. If because a lot of mobile game, and I don't remember how Fantasian made this work because it's been a long time since I tried playing it on my phone. But a lot of mobile games or games on mobile with free movement like that do use a virtual stick. And if Fantasian did that in that case, then it would still be the same problem, right?
Mhm.
But it might have also had movement controls that were just like, tap on the environment, character moves there, and that would alleviate the problem. I just don't really know how it worked. But you're right in bringing up the point that this was originally developed for mobile. That could be a relic of that. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Besides the point, when I tried playing it on my phone, I was using my backbone, so I was playing technically with controller anyway.
Right.
Mm.
So I would have been using the stick. I just didn't get very far to say one way or another. Um, I do want to wrap us up very soon. I guess the last thing I do want to bring up before the final question is we haven't talked a lot about the music, and this is another thing that for at least the first half I was a little let down by, and it really started to pick up and get way better toward the latter half. The only lingering feeling I really have about the music, and keep in mind it's a Nobuo Uematsu soundtrack. Like, if you're a Final Fantasy fan at all, you love his work by default.
Mhm.
So naturally, I love his work. Um, I think for someone that is such a storied composer and has created so many amazing battle music or battle themes, the main battle theme of this game kind of sucks.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not
There,
his strongest. I
there
wonder if
are
that's why they added the ability to change to other Final Fantasy battle songs.
maybe.
Well, there
Um,
are other battle themes that are great,
I'm
but
I'm I'm talking about the main
I
one
know,
though,
I
like
know,
the yeah,
I agree with you that the main one is lackluster, and some of the boss ones they're good, but they're also, as we discussed while we were playing, they're also clearly taking riffs and
yeah,
sections from past Final Fantasies. Most notably, Man with the Machine Gun from Final Fantasy VIII.
yeah.
Um, at the same time, like, how old is Uematsu now?
Hold
Like,
on. Let's find out.
because like I agree with you overall. Like this doesn't reach the level of like his best work back in the
He's
'90s, but at the same time, how old is he now?
he's only 65.
Right now?
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding? Because I
He
remember
he
pictures of him
was he
back
was
in the early
born
2000s with
he was
already.
born in 1959. He is only 65 years old.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought he was like 20 years older.
I kind of did too, to be honest with you. And Sakaguchi is 62.
No, I know Sakaguchi's in his
Yeah.
60s. I thought Uematsu was older.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Anyway, the only point I was making or was trying to make was that like it's not like any of the music's bad, but it's definitely not like his A game. I
Yeah.
don't.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I think he's drawing a lot on previous works here,
And
and honestly, the same could be said of the few pieces he does for 14. I think the last game where he really put in, or the last games where he really put in all his effort were like 9 and 10. And 10, he wasn't even the sole composer on.
um yeah, I mean he did do the original release for 14. He did the music for 1.0. And also no, he wasn't the composer for 11. That was Naoshi Mizuta, I think, for the most part. So yeah, I mean, I won't disagree with that sentiment.
And
Like,
keep in mind, guys, this is one of, if not my favorite composer of all time for me
yeah,
personally. He's up there with like Ennio Morricone, who, if you don't know, spaghetti westerns, probably every spaghetti western theme you know about. But yeah,
but like there is a silver lining. Like a lot of the boss themes, and particularly in the latter half, and especially like the final boss music, like
yeah,
kicking, like really really good stuff. So it does
and the
kind of come
bosses
back
lead up.
around.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does kind of come back around eventually. It's just for, this is the same guy that composed Let the Battles Begin, the same guy that composed I mean really any Final Fantasy main battle theme from 1 through 9. Every single one of them is a banger. Some
yeah.
of them better than others, but like every single one is still a banger at the end of the day. So this main battle theme in this game was just a very big disappointment.
And to be fair, I think a lot of the world exploration music was actually pretty good. Like when I was first going through that first village, and like I was, and again, he's drawing a little bit of this earlier work. Like I was getting Fisherman's Horizon vibes.
Yeah, I was gonna say Fisherman's Horizon.
A lot of 8, because 8 is arguably the best soundtrack, even though he says 9 is his favorite, and it's my favorite. But 8 is arguably, I would argue, his best.
Eight is his best. Let's face it.
But anyways,
yeah,
it's good. It's just it's not as good as we would have hoped.
yeah. I like it, just compounding the letdowns that kind of hit me with this game. That one early on was one of the biggest letdowns I had, and it got better eventually. It did get better. But
I agree.
Delilah is like listening to us talk about all these different like tracks by name, and she's like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Not by
Sounds
name,
right.
no, not absolutely. But I do know even the Final Fantasy games I didn't play, I do know a lot of the soundtracks because I went down a rabbit hole because I do like his work.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good, cool.
But
And not just Final Fantasy,
I
you've
like
done
the
work on other
music, it was
stuff,
fine.
Chrono
Well,
Trigger.
if you want to hear more thoughts on if you want to hear more of our thoughts on like Final Fantasy music, stay tuned for the inevitable Final Fantasy 9 spoiler cast that we're going to be doing very very shortly.
Yeah, tomorrow.
And let's not also forget about 1 and 2 and 3 and
Oh my god.
6.
yeah. Any other comments before we get to the final question? No. Jason, anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, just
Okay.
to reiterate, gameplay was really key here and carried it.
Yeah.
Story was at best decent.
I think that this is gonna be our least viewed episode because
Probably. I mean,
I think this game's really hard, and so that's one thing. And two, I think it's so niche. Like I was trying to like listen to other perspectives on this game to like I like to listen to perspectives before I come hard with my own because it helps me think of mine more broadly and not so like not I'm not inflicting so much of my bias, like I'm thinking of things more critically. And so I was trying to listen to stuff, and there's not really much stuff out there about this game, and the stuff that is out there has very minimal like views, I guess. Which doesn't matter, whatever. We're not doing it for views, obviously. We do it because we enjoy it. But the point I was trying to make is that I feel like even the people who created content on this game, like talked about or reviewed this game, it feels like when I heard them talking about this game, it feels like they didn't even play it like fully. Or maybe it was just a review on part 1, but when they were like, oh, you get like a 30 limit dimension machine, I was like, actually it's 50, but sure. And I'm like, you didn't play the whole game, did you?
And
Delilah,
most of
you
those
you should
videos,
know as well as I do that that's just the world of content creation.
Yeah, it
also-
just
and
feels
also
like
most
people
of
read
them-
off a script.
most of the content creators you're probably talking about are like dedicated JRPG channels or dedicated Final Fantasy channels, or almost to that point. I mean,
how dedicated are they really?
I don't disagree with you, Delilah. This is absolutely a game made for people like me and Mark, who that is, our favorite, that we grew up like really focused on those games, and they're still our favorite games and our favorite genre. I mean, it's almost like at one point in time, real-time strategy games were, the king. It is no longer the case. There are still real-time strategy games that come out, but it's a niche.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about that, go check out Jason Schreier's Play Nice: The Rise and Fall of Blizzard Entertainment, out now. Just kidding. but yeah, it's like the reason I'm like I feel like I'm so harsh on this game and in this episode is because yeah, Jason, you're right. Like
I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed.
There you go.
I'm Sakaguchi's father. That's like 30 years his junior.
Meanwhile,
Yes.
meanwhile I'm sitting here playing devil's advocate, licking my ice cream. There's always money in the banana stand, Mark.
Yeah, I'm being so down on this game because I know what Sakaguchi is capable of. I know the kinds of games that he's made and how much they resonate with me. And for this game to just let me down in so many different ways, despite all the great things that it does do, the things that I came to it for, it's a case of the things that I thought I was going to enjoy, I didn't, and the things that I didn't know if I'd enjoy, I really, really enjoyed.
Mhm.
And I'm
Right,
not
it's a game of
talking,
extremes. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not even talking like I didn't know if I'd enjoy turn-based combat because of course I enjoyed turn-based combat. Like I'm a Final Fantasy fan. Um, but it's also just it's disappointing that the main thing that I did come here for was lackluster in my eyes. But I did
Fair
like it.
enough.
I did like the game. I just didn't. I did not love it, and I really really thought I was gonna love it.
And I didn't hate the game. I just didn't like it.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, final.
And to be fair, I've been unusually the most positive person here, and I
Unusually.
agree. I
It's a
agree with
weird
like
feeling.
I agree with a majority of your guys' criticism, mostly due to like story and different production aspects, not necessarily like gameplay. I was probably more positive on than both of you guys, or definitely Delilah. But
Yeah,
like,
definitely Delilah.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying that I loved my time with the game. I'm not saying it's the greatest game ever, or even reaches the heights of Game is Past. But there definitely is, probably to Delilah's point, a nostalgia element there, and a fact that I love the game, that kind of gameplay to begin with, that
And to
massages it for me.
to tap into that a little bit, I do just want to say that like nostalgia's fine, and wanting to play something that brings you back to a simpler time, just put simply, is like that's fine. Um, I don't think that there's a big rallying behind this game as like, oh, this is what Final Fantasy should be or anything. And thankfully, thank God for that, because again, you've heard in episodes past where we talk about that bullshit statement that's never
Final Fantasy
been,
16.
or it's just never been what. Yeah, really, that's the main episode where I feel like I had to go on this tangent, the most, but it's never been Final Fantasy to be turn based. It's been Final Fantasy to just push the needle forward in terms of presentation, and that's what that series has always been about. It just happened to be conveyed through turn-based combat for a very long time, and like this game, it doesn't take the best lessons it could from Final Fantasy to bring to present like this great nostalgic product. It's nostalgic almost to a fault in that it just grabs like certain elements from past games and presents them devoid of context. And that I think is really the crux of the issue. And if there was a little more originality in this game's, I guess, narrative and structure, I think it would have worked way better, because we've seen a lot of originality in its gameplay.
Yeah.
And that's even with it calling back and being nostalgic toward older games, but it still manages to innovate and do some really interesting things with it. So that's ultimately, I think, where I find where my final stance is with it.
Mm-hmm. For
Are
sure.
we ready?
I just like Sakaguchi's design philosophy and approaches.
That's
At
fine.
the end of the day, that might even be why I love Final Fantasy so much. Not even because of the brand, but because of Sakaguchi's design philosophy that
Yeah.
made me fall in love with the series. And so playing this game, I get a lot of that, even if the story wasn't up to the same caliber.
Yeah. Are we ready for the final question?
Sure.
Yeah.
So recently, with the lead up to the release of this game, I'll put it in the description. But there was a interview that The Verge conducted with Hironobu Sakaguchi in the lead up to Fantasian Neo Dimensions release, And Sakaguchi said something that I feel like a lot of people took out of context and didn't really understand, despite it being in the article that they clearly didn't read. And what he essentially said was he wants his final game to be a successor to Final Fantasy VI, which I thought was interesting and a little odd because, as I mentioned earlier, this game,
because
the
this
idea
game is
behind,
very clearly, yeah.
well, it's like it's documented. He said that like he played Final Fantasy VI, and that's what kind of inspired him to make Fantasian. And so I sit here and I wonder, and I pose this question to you guys: is Fantasian his final game? Do you think we'll get another game from Sakaguchi and that will be his final game? And what can, if that's the case, like what can he really pull from Final Fantasy VI that he didn't really do here? That I guess would make that a more clear and defined successor, quote unquote, to Final Fantasy VI.
I don't feel like I'm equipped to answer this question. However, I hope for Jason's sake that this is not Sakaguchi's last game. And also,
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Sakaguchi. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
this wouldn't be the best way to go out. So go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I have no problem with him going full Miyazaki Studio Ghibli fam. Famously,
This is my
Miyazaki
final
like
game.
spent
No,
5 movies.
this one is.
Yeah, Miyazaki spent like 4 or 5 films saying this was going to be his last film,
Yeah.
and some of his best work was like the last few of those films that were supposedly after he had already retired. I don't know how many times he retired, like 2 or 3 times he claimed he
And
retired, but like Spirited Away was made after he claimed he had retired. So
to
I don't know. I have no problem with Sakaguchi continuing to make games.
play devil's advocate though, and not, this isn't like, this is my final game, but this is my final game in this series being repeated over and over again. Kojima had said that since Metal Gear Solid 2. And then that led to Metal Gear Solid 3, and then that was his final, and then 4, and then that was his final, and then eventually 5. And is there a point where you what's the Harvey Dent quote that I'm trying to think of? You know exactly what I'm trying to say, Jason. Um
You live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
could that happen potentially with Sakaguchi if he continued trying to make the successor to
Well,
Final Fantasy VI that he wants to make?
I think the key difference here is that Sakaguchi doesn't need to make another game, and he has pretty much complete creative freedom,
Yeah.
as opposed to like Kojima, who very clearly did not want to make those sequels and was trying to do very different things, at least narrative wise with them.
Hmm.
Um, but he was forced to by his publisher. He did not have. I mean, he did have a lot of creative freedom, but
Not even
he
just,
had to work within the bounds of Metal Gear.
and not even the pressure from this publisher, but the pressure from fans. Like he did have a lot of factors out of his control coming down to him. Like, it's not a perfect analogy, but you see why I bring it up. Um,
Yeah, no, I get it. I guess I have more faith with Sakaguchi because that dude can chillax, and when he's struck with a good idea and he really wants to move ahead, I mean, it's his fucking it's his fucking own studio.
I don't know. I mean, someone's got to be pressuring him because I know he just wants to get around to his hip hop career.
Yeah, the dude literally he's got enough money to do whatever he wants.
It's
He
a
could never make
very
another game again if he wanted to.
It's a very niche Mega 64 reference for those who don't know. Anyway, and I also prefaced this final question with the whole, a lot of people took this out of context. A lot of people took this to mean that Sakaguchi wants to make a sequel to Final Fantasy VI. That's not what successor means. Please, if you believed that up until listening to us talk about this, he doesn't want to make a sequel to Final Fantasy VI. That's not what that word means.
No.
Yeah, and there were thumbnails. Some people were saying, "Oh, he wants to make a remake of Final Fantasy." It's like, what the fuck? Oh my god!
Yeah, the content creator mill is churning today, boys. Um, yeah, it's
Dreamcast guy had a bunch. I think Dreamcast guy had at least
oh,
2 thumbnails. Yeah.
don't even get me fucking started. Anyway, um, yeah, I think that this was an attempt at a successor to Final Fantasy VI. Clearly, I mean, you even have kind of down to a light World of Ruin ordeal going on with the latter half. I mean, everything about it screams Final Fantasy VI, from the characters to the what happens
Yeah.
in the narrative and the structure of the game, and it just doesn't come anywhere near the highs that that game accomplishes. And that's not even my favorite Final
No,
Fantasy. It's not even in my top five, but I recognize what that game did, and it's
I'm not even gonna.
phenomenal.
I'm not even gonna comment. You just said 6 was not in your
Not
top. Anyway,
not even in my
move
top.
on.
I would put just as an aside, Jason. Maybe this will make you feel a little better. I would put Final Fantasy V above Final Fantasy VI personally.
To be fair, like this goes both ways because I would say 7's not even in my top 5. But
Yeah, so there you go. Which is surprising for you, actually. Come to think of it, I think we can both agree at the very least that 14 is in our top five.
I don't know if I would agree with that. But I
Wow!
do enjoy
All right.
14.
Anyway,
Huh?
conversation off
This is
for
not a
off air.
Final Fantasy ranking
Special
conversation. Let's move on.
episode.
I said I wasn't going to comment, but
Hi,
in
everybody.
saying I wasn't
Welcome
going
to
to
our
comment,
Final
I commented.
Fantasy ranking episode.
Yeah.
I'm excited. All right, let's wrap up. Jason, what's the
All
Cosmic
right, let's wrap
rating?
this up. Yeah. 7.7. I feel like that's a good round number. It was originally an 8.5, but it slowly went down, particularly because of the narrative through that back half. I was still having a lot of fun. Just 7.7 though.
7.7.
7.7.
No, 7.7 what?
Oh, sorry.
Every time.
7.7. Yeah, no, I always forget that there has to be something attached to it. 7.7 Midori's. Or Sadmirays, or whatever the fuck they're called.
You
I just call them Midori's.
7.7 thing that's not in this game. Okay.
7.7 sword attacks that are like universally useful because Leo has to be the most powerful character.
Hmm.
All right.
Again, by design, because he's the only guaranteed. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Delilah, you got anything you want to plug?
No.
Okay. Never mind.
Delilah's
Yeah,
like,
no,
fuck this game. I don't want to think about it again.
Man,
Marvel Rivals, here I come.
We're just not
No.
that kind of show anymore, man.
No, honestly, I mean, the truth is, I guess for people who actually care, which I don't think many do, but if you do, I had to get rid of Adobe Premiere Pro because they tried to charge me double what I was paying. So
Oh, yeah.
I have to learn a new software before I could create content again.
What are you gonna use? Out of
Probably
curiosity.
DaVinci. That's
Oh,
what
okay.
people are recommending. It's free.
If you liked this episode, thanks for thank you so much. Thank you for listening. If you listen on app or if you listen on YouTube, thank you. Please subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you liked or didn't like about this game if you played it. If we were being too harsh on it, if you have anything you want to add, just let us know in the comments. Tell us, regale us with your tale of your time with Fantasian.
Yeah.
If you and like the episode, subscribe to the chat. Yeah, the usual drill. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, thank you. Please rate and review the show. 5 stars preferred. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. You could tell that I'm really, really tired. I feel like this episode beside, I've been talking for like 6 straight hours, and I'm just ready to not talk. So you get to listen to that. Delilah, what is the next game that we're going to be discussing?
It's a good one, guys. Yakuza 0.
Oh, we're returning to Yakuza. This is so exciting. We talked about Kiwami in like 2020, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe even 2019. We talked about that game a long, long time ago. And we're finally going back to Kamurocho. And I think Kyoto is the other district that game takes place in. I don't know. We're going to find out because we're going to play Yakuza 0, the prequel that tells it all, goes all the way
As
back.
Bando Simulator. Yeah.
Oh yeah, get to find out how Majima lost that eye. Maybe, probably not. I think he already has the eye patch at that point. We'll find out. Play Yakuza 0 if you want to join us for the next episode. That's where you'll get to hear us talk about that. So until then, thanks for listening.